The Silver Spoon Café buzzed with the gentle hum of an evening crowd, the low murmur of conversations blending with the soft clinking of porcelain and the muted notes of a blues tune drifting from the old jukebox in the corner. The aroma of fresh brewed coffee and warm pastries swirled through the air, a comforting embrace that welcomed Officer Alex Turner after a long, unforgiving shift. Alex pushed through the cafe's familiar glass door, its small brass bell chiming softly as he stepped inside. The creased lines on his face, carved by years of service in Willow Creek, deepened as he exhaled a sigh of relief. This was his haven, the place where he could shed the rigid demeanor of a law enforcer and be just a man seeking a moment of peace. His dark, wavy hair, slightly disheveled, framed a face marked with exhaustion and resolve. Tonight, the weight on his shoulders felt heavier. The promise of a quiet evening with his wife, Mia, was the only thing propelling him forward. He nodded to a few regulars seated at the wooden counter, their nods of acknowledgement barely perceptible through the thick chatter. As Alex made his way to his usual corner booth, he glanced at the clock above the counter. 7 by Mon P. He had exactly an hour before he needed to be home, dressed, and ready for their anniversary dinner. "Evening, Alex," called out Marjorie, the cafe's owner, a kind woman with hair the color of silver and eyes that had seen decades of stories unfold. She gave him a knowing smile, as if aware of his little rituals. "Evening, Marge. Just a quick one tonight," Alex replied, returning her smile with a tired nod. He sank into the familiar cracked leather seat of his booth, the tension in his shoulders easing as he pulled out his phone. The screen illuminated with a message from Mia. "Can't wait to see you. Love you." The warmth that spread in his chest at the thought of her was cut short by a commotion outside the cafe. Through the misted glass of the window, a figure swayed unsteadily under the dim glow of the street lamp. Alex's brow furrowed as he observed the thin silhouette. An elderly woman, wearing what appeared to be a faded hospital gown, stood alone, her frail body trembling with each gust of the chilly wind. For a moment, he rationalized it away. This was not his problem. He was off duty, and his plans for the evening lay ahead. The police uniform beneath his casual jacket itched as if in protest to his thoughts, reminding him of the oath he had taken. But something in the woman's posture, her haunted, vacant stare, sank into his bones. She began to move, staggering towards the cafe entrance with slow, uncertain steps. The chatter in the cafe softened as a few heads turned, curiosity piqued by the sight of the woman. Alex's pulse quickened as the door opened with a creak and the brass bell announced her entry. The room fell into a hush as she shuffled inside, eyes darting around with an unfocused glaze. Her hands, thin and marred by age, twitched, as if seeking purchase on the air itself. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Marjorie's voice was soft, but edged with concern as she approached the woman. The elderly woman's gaze locked onto Alex, a glimmer of recognition sparking in her faded blue eyes. Without a word, she moved towards his booth, each step deliberate and heavy. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath as she reached him, leaning down until her face was mere inches from his. "They should have let him rest," she whispered, her voice raspy and broken, carrying the weight of a confession. But now, it's too late. The room erupted in a flurry of murmurs, but Alex only heard the pounding of his own heart. The cafe's stillness shattered into fragments as the elderly woman's cryptic words lingered in the air. Alex's eyes met hers, searching for some explanation, some flicker of coherence that might make sense of what she had just whispered. But all he found was an ocean of fear, deep and restless, in her faded gaze. "Ma'am," Alex said, keeping his voice low and steady, "I'm Officer Alex Turner with the Willow Creek Police Department. Can you tell me your name?" A tremor ran through her body, a shiver that seemed to stem not from the cold, but from some unseen, gnawing dread. She swayed, her thin legs buckling beneath the weight of whatever nightmare haunted her. Without thinking, Alex rose from his seat and reached out, steadying her with one hand. The cafe's patrons shifted uneasily, their curiosity tinged with apprehension. I'm Eliza," she stammered, her voice barely more than a breath. Eliza Monroe. The name stirred something at the edge of Alex's memory, an echo from old police logs, or perhaps the muttered gossip of townsfolk. Eliza, who are you talking about? He asked gently, eyes flicking to Marjorie, who was already on her way to call for help. Who should have been allowed to rest? Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, and for a moment her face crumpled like an old letter, every line etched deeper by grief. My George, she whispered, a sob choking the words. They wouldn't let him go, and now he's trapped. Before Alex could ask more, Eliza's knees buckled completely. He caught her just as the door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and a swirl of leaves. A uniformed paramedic, summoned by Marjorie's quick thinking, rushed to Eliza's side, her medical bag already unzipped and ready. I need you to step back, officer, the paramedic said, her voice brisk but understanding. Alex obliged, but he kept his eyes on Eliza as they laid her onto a stretcher, noting the way her thin fingers clutched at the air, as if reaching for someone unseen. Marjorie approached him, worry lines deepening on her aged face. Alex, what do you think she meant? I've known Eliza for years, but I haven't seen her since George's funeral. And even then, she looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. Alex frowned, the weight of the moment pressing on him. George Monroe. Suddenly, the name clicked into place. George had been a well-liked man in Willow Creek, known for his work as a woodcarver and his kind smile. But his death, sudden and shrouded in whispers, had sent a ripple of unease through the community. Some claimed he had been ill for a long time, while others hinted at something more sinister. I don't know, Marge, Alex replied, watching as the paramedics wheeled Eliza out, their radios crackling with updates. But I'm going to find out. Later that evening, as the last traces of twilight melted into the deep blue of night, Alex sat at his kitchen table. Papers and old case files spread out like a map of forgotten memories. Mia walked in, her eyes narrowing at the mess. The warm light from the overhead lamp caught her chestnut hair, framing her concerned expression. Is this how you plan to celebrate our anniversary? She asked, her voice teasing but touched with disappointment. She glanced at the untouched dinner plates on the counter, still warm from the oven. Alex looked up, an apology already forming on his lips, but Mia's expression softened when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. It's about that woman from the cafe, isn't it? He nodded. Eliza Monroe. Do you remember George? Mia's brow furrowed as she thought back. Of course. He was kind, always carving little wooden toys for the kids at the community center. But I remember his death. It was sudden, wasn't it? And there were rumors. Exactly, Alex said, gesturing to the stack of reports. But I need to understand what she meant. She said something about not letting him rest, and that it's too late now. Mia's expression turned somber as she sat beside him. Alex, do you think it's connected to the rumors about George's illness? Some people said he was suffering and that the doctors, well, they didn't do enough. Maybe, Alex said, running a hand over his face. The memory of Eliza's frail body and haunted eyes wouldn't let him rest. But there was something in her voice, Mia, a kind of terror I can't shake. I need to know what happened to George, and I need to know why Eliza is so afraid. Silence wrapped around them, heavy and uncertain. Mia reached out, placing her hand on his. Then let's find out. The clock on the wall ticked away the seconds, each one bringing them closer to a truth that would unravel more than just a forgotten story. It would pull at the very fabric of Willow Creek's hidden past. The next morning, a thin veil of fog clung to Willow Creek, shrouding the town in an eerie quiet. Alex stepped out of his house, the chill biting at his exposed neck. Mia, still wrapped in her robe, watched him from the doorway, worry etched into her soft features. Be careful, Alex, she said, her voice almost swallowed by the damp air. He nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. I always am. But as he turned toward his car, his mind was a storm of doubt and questions. Eliza Monroe's words echoed in his thoughts, mingling with George's name and the unsettling rumors that had followed his death. He knew that whatever truth was buried there, it would not come easily. Driving through Willow Creek felt different that morning. The streets, usually bustling with early risers and shopkeepers preparing for the day, were still. The mist blurred the outlines of familiar buildings, casting ghostly shapes that seemed to whisper secrets. Alex's destination was the town library, a place as much a part of the town's fabric as its cobblestone streets and white picket fences. The library sat in the center of Willow Creek, its stone facade and ivy-draped walls a testament to its age. Inside, the air was rich with the scent of old paper and varnished wood. The librarian, Eleanor Burke, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and an encyclopedic memory, glanced up as he entered. "Officer Turner," she said, lifting a brow, "to what do we owe the pleasure this early?" "Good morning, Eleanor," Alex said, managing a polite nod. "I need to look at some records. Specifically, anything you have on George Monroe." Eleanor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "George Monroe. That's a name I haven't heard in a while." She gestured for Alex to follow her down a narrow aisle, flanked by shelves teeming with history. "What's your interest in George?" Alex paused, considering how much to reveal. "I ran into Eliza Monroe yesterday. She mentioned something strange, and I'm trying to piece together what happened to George." Eleanor's face softened, and she let out a sigh as if she had been expecting this day to come. "Ah, Eliza. Such a kind soul, but that family has been haunted by its share of misfortune. George was a good man, but when he fell ill, things turned dark. Very dark." They reached the archive room, a space reserved for the town's oldest documents. Eleanor pointed to a stack of newspaper clippings and medical files that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. "This should help," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But be careful, Alex. Not everything from the past should be disturbed." Alex felt a chill run down his spine, but gave her a grateful nod. "Thank you, Eleanor." As he sifted through the documents, a clearer picture of George Monroe began to form. Reports detailed his rapid decline, a sudden and cruel illness that left him bedridden and in excruciating pain. But what caught Alex's eye was an article from a smaller, now-defunct publication. Murmurs of Mercy Denied. It hinted at disagreements between George's doctors and Eliza, who had begged for relief for her husband. The words jumped out at Alex. Eliza Monroe was seen pleading with Dr. Harris at the hospital, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "He needs peace, doctor. You can't keep him in this state." Alex leaned back, running a hand through his hair as the pieces started to align in his mind. The rumors of medical neglect weren't just rumors, they were warnings. But warnings of what? And why had Eliza whispered that it was too late? Before he could delve further, his phone buzzed, breaking the silence of the archive room. It was Ben Rivera, his partner. "Alex," Ben said, his voice tinged with urgency, "you're not going to believe this. I just got a call from Willow Creek General. They're reporting an incident involving Eliza Monroe." Alex's pulse quickened. "What happened?" "She was found wandering the halls early this morning, saying something about George and an unfinished promise. They've had to sedate her, but they think she might have escaped the night before." The room seemed to tilt slightly as Alex stood, the edges of his vision narrowing with focus. "I'm on my way." When Alex arrived at the hospital, the sterile brightness of the lobby greeted him like an unwelcome friend. He spotted Ben, tall and steady with a look of quiet competence, speaking to one of the nurses at the reception desk. The nurse, a young man with weary eyes, noticed Alex and motioned him over. "Officer Turner, it's good you're here," the nurse said. "Eliza Monroe has been in and out of lucidity. The doctors are trying to stabilize her, but whatever she's been through, it's taken a toll." Ben crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. They found her mumbling about George, Alex, something about unfinished business, and they didn't let him rest. "Oh," Alex's jaw tightened. "Where is she now?" "Room 204, but I should warn you, she's sedated," the nurse said. "She might not be coherent." The two officers exchanged a glance before heading down the hall. The rhythmic beep of monitors and the antiseptic scent of the hospital followed them like shadows. When they reached Eliza's room, Alex felt a pang of guilt. She lay on the bed, frail and ghost-like against the white sheets, eyes half closed but flickering with awareness. "Eliza," Alex said softly, stepping into her line of sight. Her gaze shifted slowly, recognition sparking as she met his eyes. "Officer Turner," she rasped, her voice a brittle thread. "Did you find him? Did you find George?" Alex's breath caught. "Eliza, George passed away, remember? But I need to know, what did you mean at the cafe? What weren't they letting him do?" Eliza's eyes welled with tears that seemed to hold the weight of an ocean. "They didn't let him go," she whispered, her hand fluttering weakly over the blanket. "I begged them, but they wouldn't. They kept him here, in this world, when he needed peace." A silence fell over the room, as deep and chilling as the winter wind. Ben spoke up, his voice low. "Alex, what do you think she means by kept him here? Are we talking malpractice or something worse?" Alex didn't answer immediately, the gravity of Eliza's words pulling at his thoughts. He knew there was more buried in the past, hidden behind hospital walls and unspoken agreements, and he was determined to find it, no matter how deep the shadows went. The hospital room felt suffocating, each beep of the monitors echoing like a ticking clock counting down to some unseen reckoning. Alex's heart thudded in sync with the steady rhythm, his mind racing as Eliza's frail voice faded into a strained silence. The weight of her words, "They didn't let him go," pressed against his chest, sparking more questions than answers. "Eliza, who wouldn't let him go? Was it the doctors?" Alex leaned forward, searching her pale face for any sign of clarity. Eliza's eyes, dulled by exhaustion and age, glistened with a sudden, sharp intensity. For a brief moment, she was more than just a confused elderly woman. She was a widow, still fighting a battle long thought lost. "It wasn't just them," she whispered, the tremor in her voice striking a dissonant chord. "There were other voices, other hands. They didn't listen. They kept him tied here, tied to us." Before Alex could ask more, her eyelids drooped, and a nurse entered the room, a stern expression crossing her face. "I think that's enough for now, officer. Mrs. Monroe needs rest." Alex nodded, standing reluctantly as Ben followed him out into the hallway. The doors closed behind them with a soft click, leaving the two officers in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridor. "Alex, this is getting strange," Ben said, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "What does she mean by other hands? We're talking about a dying man's treatment in a small-town hospital, not some conspiracy." "I know," Alex replied, his brow furrowed. "But there's something here, Ben. George Monroe wasn't just a patient. He was the soul of Willow Creek. His death shook people, but if Eliza is right, it's more than just grief. There's guilt deep enough to haunt her years later." Ben's expression softened, a rare glint of concern breaking through his usual stoicism. "So what's our next move?" Alex took a deep breath. "We talked to someone who was there, someone who can tell us what really happened that night." By midday, Alex found himself standing in front of the small, weathered house of Dr. Richard Harris, the now-retired physician who had overseen George's care. The house sat at the edge of town, leaning slightly as if burdened by its own age. The porch creaked under Alex's boots as he knocked, the sound reverberating through the quiet street. A shuffling noise came from inside, followed by the scrape of a lock. The door opened to reveal Dr. Harris, a tall, gaunt man whose once authoritative posture had been softened by the years. His thinning hair framed a lined face, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights or memories too dark to forget. "Alex Turner," the doctor said, recognizing the officer with a nod. "I was wondering when you might come by. I assume this is about Eliza?" Alex's surprise must have shown because Dr. Harris's lips pulled into a thin smile. "News travels fast in Willow Creek, even from hospital halls. Yes, doctor, it's about Eliza and George. She mentioned something at the cafe yesterday that, well, it raised questions," Alex admitted, stepping inside as the doctor gestured him in. The living room was a cluttered testament to a life of service. shelves lined with worn medical journals, faded photographs of family vacations, and an old certificate of honor from the town council. "Doctor?" Harris motioned to a chair by the fireplace, settling into the one across from it with a sigh that seemed to come from the deepest part of him. "George was one of the toughest cases I ever had, Doctor," Harris began, his voice heavy with memory. "He was in pain, a type of pain most people can't even imagine. And Eliza, she begged me to help him find peace." Alex leaned forward, the heat of the fireplace warming his hands. "What happened, Doctor? Why did Eliza say you didn't let him go?" "Doctor?" Harris's eyes flitted away, settling on a framed photograph of a fishing trip. I wanted to honor George's wishes, but the hospital board refused. There was pressure from above, not just about George, but about protocols and precedents. We couldn't risk a case that could make people question the way we handled terminal patients." A silence thick with implications settled between them. "Pressure from above?" Alex echoed, suspicion coiling in his gut. "Who was calling the shots, Doctor?" "Dr. William Royce," Harris said finally, the name slipping from his lips like a stone into deep water. He was the head of the board then. He had connections, ties to state-level health officials. He wouldn't allow a decision that might label the hospital as one willing to cross certain ethical lines. The name chilled Alex. Dr. Royce had a reputation as a man more interested in prestige than patients. "Did Royce make the final decision to keep George on life support?" Alex pressed. Harris nodded, the motion jerky and burdened. "And not just that. He ensured that if anyone questioned it, they'd face consequences. I'm retired now, they can't touch me anymore. But back then, I was afraid for my career, for my family." Anger flared in Alex's chest, hot and potent. George's death hadn't been an unavoidable tragedy. It had been managed, directed by someone seeking to maintain an untarnished record. But at what cost? He looked back at Dr. Harris, noting the deep shadows beneath the man's eyes. "Thank you for telling me, Doctor," Alex said, rising. "This isn't over." As Alex stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the town of Willow Creek seemed different, almost malevolent in its familiarity. He dialed Ben's number as he walked to his car, his voice steady but urgent. "Ben, we need to dig into Dr. Royce's past, especially his time on the hospital board. I think we're dealing with more than just a story of grief. This might be a cover-up." Ben's sigh on the other end of the line was short, but Alex could almost see him nodding. "I'm on it." "And Alex? Be careful." Alex hung up, the click of the call ending like a trigger pulled back. He looked at the horizon where the sun struggled against the gathering clouds, feeling the weight of Eliza's whispered plea settle deeper into his bones. The past was rising, and it would demand more than whispers to be silenced. The first whispers of evening spread across the town as Alex stood outside the Willow Creek Police Department. The sky above deepened to a bruised shade of purple, and streetlights blinked to life, casting pools of yellowed light on the cobblestone streets. Alex took a moment to ground himself, breathing in the cool, sharp air as the weight of the day threatened to push him under. The conversation with Dr. Harris churned in his mind like a dark tide. Dr. William Royce had ties to state-level health officials, and his influence had spread through the hospital like roots seeking out stability. But it wasn't stability that Royce achieved, it was control. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Alex walked past desks stacked with files and the hum of fellow officers wrapping up their shifts. Ben was waiting for him in their shared office, a cup of coffee in his hand and a pile of papers spread out before him. "Got what you asked for," Ben said, his expression serious. "But you're not going to like it." Alex took the seat across from him, eyeing the thick manila folder. "Hit me!" Ben flipped open the folder, revealing pages of records, reports, and grainy photographs from old newspaper articles. Dr. William Royce was the head of the hospital board for nearly 2 decades. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 cases over the years involved patients whose families requested an end-of-life decision. And each time, Royce intervened to keep them on life support. 2 of those cases led to malpractice suits, but they were buried under settlements. Alex's jaw tightened as he absorbed the information. And George Monroe was the third case, he said, not needing to phrase it as a question. Ben nodded. George wasn't just a case to Eliza, he was her whole world. And Royce's reputation was built on never compromising, no matter what it cost others. The hospital's record stayed clean, but it's clear now it came at the price of people's pain. Alex's mind raced, threading the needle through everything he'd learned. Royce's ambition had cloaked itself in the guise of ethical rigor, but the truth was far from noble. His eyes settled on a photocopy of an old letter, scrawled in shaky handwriting, Eliza's plea to the hospital board, begging them to honor George's wishes. "Did you find anything about Royce's connections? What gave him this kind of power?" Alex asked, flipping through the documents. Ben pointed to a page near the bottom of the stack, a report from a state health oversight committee. Royce had a brother-in-law who served on the committee. He leveraged that connection to ensure any disputes at Willow Creek General were handled quietly. Any whispers of unethical practices never saw the light of day. The room seemed colder, the chill of what they were uncovering seeping into the walls. Alex leaned back, the chair creaking as he processed their next move. "We need to talk to Royce," he said, the words tasting bitter. "But I doubt he'll give us anything willingly." Ben's eyes narrowed. "I did some digging. Royce lives on the old estate north of town. Retired 2 years ago, but he's still connected, still pulling strings." A sharp knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Captain Evelyn Ross, a formidable woman with eyes as sharp as the badge on her chest, stepped in. She took one look at the papers on the desk and sighed, her expression unreadable. "Care to tell me what's going on here, Turner?" she asked, her tone both curious and challenging. Alex exchanged a glance with Ben before meeting the captain's gaze. "We're looking into the circumstances of George Monroe's death, Captain. There's reason to believe there were unethical decisions made by the hospital board, led by Dr. Royce." Ross's eyes flickered with something Alex couldn't quite read. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Royce was untouchable back then, and he's managed to keep it that way. But if you're right, Turner, you need to be careful. The man's reach goes further than you might think." Alex's pulse quickened. "Did you know anything about this when it happened?" he asked, surprised by the steel in his own voice. Ross's mouth thinned into a hard line. "I knew enough to stay out of it. Back then, officers who poked around Royce's affairs found themselves on the wrong end of an early retirement, or worse. But the world's changed, Alex. If you're determined to see this through, I'll make sure you have the department's backing." The silence that followed was both a challenge and a promise. Alex felt a swell of gratitude for the captain's trust, but it was quickly overshadowed by the daunting path that lay ahead. "Thank you, Captain," he said, his voice steady. Ross nodded once, her eyes softer now. "Be smart? Royce won't play fair." That evening, Alex sat in his car outside the sprawling estate that Royce called home. The house, a relic of old money, loomed against the star-pricked sky, its ivy-covered walls shrouded in shadows. Alex's headlights cut through the dark, illuminating the iron gate that stood like a sentinel before the long driveway. Ben sat in the passenger seat, tension radiating off him. "You ready for this?" Alex nodded, the resolve hardening in his gut. "We don't have a choice." The gate groaned as it opened, and they drove up the gravel path, the crunch under their tires sounding like bones breaking. Royce's estate was meticulously maintained. Not a blade of grass was out of place, and the lights from the house cast long, accusatory shadows across the lawn. A butler answered the door, his thin frame and impeccable suit exuding an air of practiced professionalism. "Dr. Royce is expecting you," he said without inflection, stepping aside to let them in. The hallway smelled of polished wood and old money. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following Alex and Ben as they moved through the house. Royce waited for them in a library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound books and heavy curtains that shut out the night. "Officers," Royce said, rising from an armchair that could have swallowed a smaller man whole. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that gleamed with calculated intelligence. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Alex stepped forward, the sound of his heartbeat thrumming in his ears. "Dr. Royce, we need to talk about George Monroe and the decisions made during his care." Royce's expression didn't flicker, but his eyes darkened subtly. "That was years ago, Officer Turner. The matter was settled long before you joined the force." "It wasn't settled for his widow," Alex said, his voice like a blade, "and it won't be settled for us until we understand why his wishes were ignored." Royce's lips twisted into a semblance of a smile, one that never reached his eyes. "Be careful where you tread, officer. Not every ghost should be stirred from its grave." But Alex didn't flinch. This time, the truth was within reach, and he wasn't about to back down. Royce's library seemed to hold its breath. The old grandfather clock in the corner chimed softly, marking the time with an ominous rhythmic click. Alex studied Royce, noting the tightness at the corners of the doctor's mouth, the slight narrowing of his eyes. This was a man used to control, a man who had played puppet master over more lives than Alex dared to count. "Dr. Royce, we're not here to rehash old files or stir up gossip," Alex said, his voice firm but calm. "We're here to find the truth. George Monroe wasn't just another patient. He was a man whose end was dictated by more than just illness. Eliza Monroe deserves answers, and we're going to get them." Royce's eyes flickered, a fleeting sign of emotion that was gone as quickly as it appeared. He motioned for them to sit in the armchairs opposite him. The leather creaked as Alex settled in, a sound as tense as the air between them. Ben leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes sharp. Royce clasped his hands, his long fingers interlocking like a cage. "You officers should understand that in my position there were often no perfect choices. What we did to preserve the hospital's integrity and prevent panic. George's case was regrettable but necessary." "Necessary?" Ben's voice was low, the single word charged with disbelief. Royce's expression remained impassive. George Monroe's suffering was real, and Eliza's pleas were difficult to ignore. But precedent matters. If we had shown leniency, it would have opened doors that we were not prepared to keep closed. Patients and their families would have questioned every decision, doubted every prognosis. Alex's fists tightened on the armrests. "You're saying you chose to keep a man alive against his will and against his wife's to maintain order?" Royce's lips thinned. "We chose stability over chaos. The line between mercy and malpractice is razor thin, Officer Turner. The public doesn't want to know how close we come to crossing it." A silence settled over the room, thick as smoke. The leather-bound books seemed to lean in, as if they too were straining to hear the confession beneath Royce's carefully chosen words. Alex took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Eliza's haunted eyes pressing on his conscience. "You kept him on life support until his body failed," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter whatever tenuous grip Royce had on his composure. "But why was Eliza so afraid? What else happened?" Royce's gaze shifted to the dark window, his reflection in the glass appearing more gaunt, more haunted than ever. It wasn't only the decision to extend George's life that tormented Eliza. There were procedures, tests, new treatments being trialed without the public's knowledge. George was one of those trials. Alex's blood ran cold. "You experimented on him?" Royce's silence was an answer in itself. He stood abruptly, turning away as if the view outside could provide some measure of distance from the sins etched into the walls of his memory. Ben stood, anger rippling across his usually stoic face. "You used him like a lab rat." "It wasn't like that," Royce snapped, the sudden heat in his voice making Alex's pulse jump. "George was too far gone, but the data from those trials has helped countless patients since then. Without those early efforts, we wouldn't have made the progress we have today." "But at what cost?" Alex asked, standing to face Royce. "Eliza knew something, didn't she? Something you kept from her until it was too late." Royce's face hardened, and he turned back to them, his eyes shadowed with something Alex could almost mistake for regret. "Eliza wasn't meant to know, but she did. Someone on my team let it slip, and she confronted me the day George died. She begged me to end it, and when I refused, she threatened to go public. And you silenced her, Alex said, the accusation heavy in the room. No, Royce said quietly, sinking back into his chair as if the memory itself sapped his strength. But I didn't have to. George's body gave out that night, sparing us all from a greater scandal. The clock chimed again, cutting through the silence like a knife. Alex felt a weight settle in his chest. The sickening realization that George Monroe had been more than a casualty of illness. He had been a pawn in a game none of them had known they were playing. Royce glanced at them, his expression a mix of defiance and exhaustion. If you take this any further, you'll drag the entire town into chaos. Think carefully, officers. Alex exchanged a look with Ben, the silent agreement between them as clear as a spoken oath. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Thank you for your time, Dr. Royce, Alex said, turning toward the door. But the truth deserves to come out, no matter how deep you've buried it. As they stepped into the cool night air, Alex felt the burden of the truth weighing on his every step. He glanced at Ben, who let out a long breath. So, what's next? Ben asked, his voice steady, a hint of fire in his eyes. Alex looked back at the house, the windows dark and impenetrable as secrets. We talked to Eliza, and this time we don't leave until we have the full story. He night whispered its secrets as Alex and Ben drove through the darkened streets of Willow Creek. Streetlights flickered and shadows stretched long across the town, winding around homes that stood silent and oblivious. Alex's mind churned, each thought more unsettling than the last. Royce's admission had changed everything. What had once seemed like an old woman's grief-stricken ramblings were now revelations clawing their way into the open. They reached Willow Creek General Hospital, its pale exterior glowing under the harsh white of the parking lot lights. Inside, the corridors were quiet, the air filled with the muted sounds of late-night television and the distant buzz of machinery. A nurse at the front desk looked up as they entered, recognition flickering in her tired eyes. "Officers," she said softly, gesturing toward the elevator. "She's awake." Eliza's room was at the end of the hall, bathed in a sterile glow that made everything seem sharper, more unforgiving. Alex pushed the door open, his breath catching when he saw her. The once proud woman was now a frail figure huddled beneath thin hospital blankets, her eyes shadowed but alert. She turned her head slowly as they stepped in, and recognition softened the worry in her gaze. "Officer Turner," Eliza said, her voice like old paper crumpling. "You've come back." Alex nodded, stepping closer as Ben took a position by the door, arms folded. "Yes, Eliza. We need to talk about George, about what happened at the hospital." Her eyes clouded, memories tightening her features. "I told them," she whispered, her fingers twisting in the blanket. "I told them to let him go, but they wouldn't. Not until they'd finished their experiments." Alex's throat tightened. Hearing it from Royce was one thing. Hearing it from Eliza was like a punch to the chest. "We spoke with Dr. Royce. He admitted to the trials, the pressure to keep George alive." "But why, Eliza? Why did they choose him?" Tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to spill over. George was strong, even when the illness ravaged him. They said he was perfect for their data. But it wasn't just the doctors. There was someone else, someone who knew and said nothing. She paused, struggling for breath as her eyes searched Alex's face. "A nurse? One who told me in secret, out of guilt. She said George was being used, and when I confronted Royce, She broke off, a tremor running through her. Ben moved closer, a flash of concern breaking through his stoic expression. "Who was this nurse, Eliza? Do you remember her name?" Eliza nodded weakly, the effort costing her. Clara Evans. She was young, new. She left after George passed. I never saw her again." The room seemed to shrink as Alex registered the name. Clara Evans. He vaguely remembered her from an old employee roster he'd seen during another case, an unassuming name buried among hundreds. "Do you think she could still be in town?" Ben asked, leaning forward, the intensity in his voice matching Alex's urgency. Eliza shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but if anyone could tell you the whole truth, it would be her. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft beeping of the heart monitor. Alex reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Eliza's frail arm. "We're going to find her, Eliza, and we're going to make sure that what happened to George isn't buried any longer." A thin smile touched her lips, but it was fleeting, a brief echo of relief before exhaustion claimed her features. "It's been so long. Thank you, Officer Turner." As they left the room, the weight of her words settled over Alex like a shroud. Clara Evans held the final piece to this puzzle, and finding her was now more than a priority, it was a promise. The next morning, the sun was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds as Alex and Ben sat in the cramped records room of the police station. Papers and old personnel files spread out before them. The fluorescent light buzzed above, casting a harsh glow on the documents. "Here it is," Ben said, holding up a file with a faded photograph paper-clipped to the front. Clara Evans, her youthful face and earnest eyes staring out from the past. "She was last listed as living on Sycamore Lane," Ben continued, flipping through the pages. "But that was 5 years ago." Alex took the file, eyes skimming the details. "We start there. If she moved, someone will know where." They reached Sycamore Lane just as the first drops of rain began to patter on the windshield. The street was lined with modest houses, their gardens well tended but marked with signs of age. A woman watering her flowers under the shelter of her porch looked up as they approached. "Excuse me, ma'am," Alex said, flashing his badge. "We're looking for Clara Evans. She used to live at number 12. Do you know if she still lives here?" The woman's eyes narrowed as she thought. "Clara? Oh no, she moved a few years back. But I think she's working over at the St. Martin's Care Home on Elm Street. She always had a heart for nursing, even after." "Well, you know." Alex's pulse quickened. "Thank you, that's very helpful." As they drove to St. Martin's, the rain picked up, drumming a steady beat against the car roof. Alex gripped the steering wheel, the tension in his hands echoing the anticipation in his chest. If Clara Evans held the answers they needed, this might finally bring justice for Eliza and the memory of George Monroe. St. Martin's Care Home sat at the end of Elm Street, a brick building surrounded by ancient oak trees whose branches creaked under the rain. Inside, the air was warm and tinged with the scent of antiseptic and lavender. A young receptionist glanced up as they entered. "Can I help you?" Ben stepped forward. "We're looking for Clara Evans." "Is she here?" The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, she's on shift." "One moment, please." She picked up a phone and spoke quietly before nodding toward a hallway. "She'll meet you in the break room." Moments later, Clara appeared, her uniform crisp and her hair tied back in a bun that only partly masked the fatigue lining her face. Her eyes met Alex's, curiosity and caution warring in her expression. "I'm Clara. Can I help you?" Alex took a deep breath. "Clara, we're here about George Monroe." Clara's eyes widened, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink around them. The hum of activity in the care home dimmed, replaced by the silence that comes before a storm. She glanced nervously at the nearby hallway, as if expecting someone to step out and interrupt. "George Monroe," she whispered, the name settling between them like a heavy stone. "I haven't heard that name in years." Alex nodded, reading the fear that flickered across her face. "We're trying to understand what happened in his final days, Clara. We spoke to Eliza, and she mentioned you, said you tried to warn her." Clara's eyes shifted to Ben, who stood with his arms crossed but posture open, signaling they weren't there to accuse. She sighed, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a fraction. "Not here," she said, her voice trembling. "Follow me." She led them down a side corridor to an empty lounge, the lights muted and the air thick with the scent of disinfectant. Once inside, she shut the door behind them, her back pressed against the wood as if it were a barrier between her and the past. "I always knew this day might come," Clara began, her gaze far away. "Back then, I was new, just starting out. I'd never seen a case like George's. He was a kind man, even when the pain was so bad that it would have made anyone else snap. He would still thank us when we adjusted his pillows or brought him water." She paused, eyes glassy with memories, before continuing. But it wasn't enough for Dr. Royce. He was obsessed with the trial data. George wasn't just a patient, he was a data point in Royce's larger ambition. Royce's team, there were whispers that the trial would push the boundaries of pain management and life extension. It was supposed to be a breakthrough, but the cost. The cost was too much. Ben uncrossed his arms, stepping forward. "What exactly did you hear or see, Clara? We need specifics." Clara's hands fidgeted, fingers twisting the fabric of her uniform. "There was one night, close to the end. I was on night duty, and I overheard Dr. Royce speaking to a board member in his office. They thought everyone had gone home. He said, 'George's suffering will be a testament to our work. We must hold out until the data is complete.'" Alex's jaw clenched, anger tightening every muscle in his body. "They prolonged his suffering to protect their results," he said, each word bitter. Clara nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek. "Eliza had sensed it too. She begged me to tell her what I knew. At first I was scared, afraid of losing my job, but one day the guilt was too much. I told her the truth. That's when she stormed into Royce's office and confronted him. The next day, George was gone. A heavy silence fell over them, interrupted only by the muffled sound of rain against the windows. Clara's voice dropped to a near whisper. "After George's death, I was approached by one of Royce's associates, someone from the board. They didn't threaten me outright, but they made it clear that my career would be over if I talked. I resigned a month later and moved away. I couldn't bear to see Eliza after what had happened." Ben glanced at Alex, eyes dark with understanding. This was bigger than malpractice. It was orchestrated suffering, covered up by influence and fear. Alex felt the pieces click into place, but they formed an ugly picture. "Clara, we need your statement. We need you to come forward, officially. Eliza deserves the truth to be known." Clara's expression shifted from fear to determination, her shoulders squaring. "I'll do it. It's time." The rain had lightened to a drizzle by the time Alex and Ben left the care home. The streets glistened under the dull glow of streetlights, reflecting the storm that had just passed. Alex stood by the car, letting the cool droplets bead on his skin, washing away the grime of secrets that had finally seen the light. "Think Royce will come after her?" Ben asked, his tone half joking, but with an edge of real concern. "He might try," Alex said, opening the car door and sliding into the seat. "But this time we're ready." Back at the station, they compiled Clara's statement, her voice shaking as she recounted the final weeks of George Monroe's life and the cold, calculating actions of Dr. Royce. It was evidence that would not only vindicate Eliza, but would potentially dismantle the powerful network that Royce had built. Captain Ross entered just as Clara finished signing the statement. She listened in silence, her face unreadable until Clara had left the room. "This is big, Turner. You're aware that this might go beyond Royce, right? If he has connections at the state level, we could be looking at a much larger fight." Alex met her gaze, determination hardening his voice. "I know, Captain, but it's worth it. Eliza deserves to know that George didn't suffer in vain. The people of Willow Creek need to know who's been making decisions that go against everything a doctor should stand for." Ross nodded, a faint smile breaking through her stoic demeanor. "Then let's make sure this sees the light of day." As the first rays of dawn stretched across the sky, painting it with muted shades of pink and gold, Alex felt the weight on his shoulders shift. The burden of truth was still there, but now it was shared, no longer a secret left to rot in the dark corners of Willow Creek. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, Alex believed they had a chance to win. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Willow Creek, igniting the town with a warmth that felt out of place given the storm brewing beneath its quaint surface. Alex stood in the police station's break room, the strong scent of coffee failing to mask the fatigue clinging to him. The silence was heavy, broken only by the clatter of Ben entering, holding a sheaf of papers. "Everything's lined up," Ben said, placing the stack on the table with a thud. The papers bore witness statements, copies of old hospital records, and Clara's signed statement. It was more evidence than Alex had dared hope for just days ago. "Good," Alex replied, a hint of steel in his voice. He glanced out the window, eyes narrowing as he caught sight of a sleek black car parked across the street. "We need to move fast. If Royce or his associates catch wind of this, they won't sit idly by." Captain Ross appeared in the doorway, her presence commanding. She took in the scene, the tension between Alex and Ben, and nodded approvingly. "I've already made calls to the district attorney's office. We're ready to proceed with an arrest warrant for Dr. Royce. But you both need to be cautious. This is the kind of storm that can tear through more than just careers." Alex and Ben exchanged a look, the gravity of the situation settling on them like a second skin. They had stepped onto the battlefield, and the enemy was formidable. But this time, they weren't fighting alone. "Let's do this," Alex said, a sense of resolve anchoring his words. By midday, Alex and Ben, flanked by 2 additional officers, arrived at Royce's estate. The gates, so imposing and cold on their first visit, now felt like the last barrier between the town's secrets and the light of truth. The driveway stretched before them like an unfurled tongue of stone, leading them into the lion's den. The butler, visibly paler than before, opened the door and stepped aside without a word. Royce stood in the grand entryway, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, as if prepared for this moment. His eyes met Alex's with a sharp, almost amused glint. "Officers," he said, his voice smooth and detached. "To what do I owe this? Return visit?" Alex's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, holding up the warrant. "Dr. Royce, you're under arrest for unethical medical practices, including unauthorized experimental treatments and obstruction of patient rights." A muscle in Royce's jaw twitched, the only betrayal of emotion. "You're making a mistake," he said, though his voice was colder now, stripped of pretense. "Do you have any idea what you're tampering with? The lives saved because of those trials. The lives destroyed," Alex interrupted, eyes blazing. "Including George Monroe's. This isn't about breakthroughs. It's about a man who suffered so you could protect your reputation." Ben moved in to cuff him, his hands steady, movements practiced. Royce didn't resist, but the air around him seemed to crackle with barely contained fury. "This will not end here," he hissed, eyes narrowing into slits. "I have friends who will ensure this goes no further than today." "Let them try," Captain Ross said, stepping in behind Alex. She looked at Royce with a mixture of contempt and determination. "We're not afraid of shadows anymore." The room was silent except for the echo of Royce's footsteps as he was led out, the grand house seeming smaller now, diminished by its master's fall. News of Royce's arrest spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. The once whispered suspicions now erupted into public outcry. The local paper splashed Royce's photograph across its front page, with bold headlines declaring the scandal that had hidden in plain sight for too long. Eliza Monroe sat in her hospital room, the sunlight streaming in through the window, soft and warm. Alex stood by her bed, his badge glinting in the light, eyes soft with compassion. When she turned to look at him, her eyes glistened not with tears, but with relief, a peace that had eluded her for years. "It's over, Eliza," Alex said, voice steady. "Royce has been arrested. Clara's statement will make sure the truth comes out. George will be remembered for who he was, not how they tried to use him." A shaky smile broke across Eliza's face. She reached out a frail hand, and Alex took it, the weight of years of silence lifting from her grasp. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling with gratitude. "You brought him justice." The days that followed were a whirlwind of interviews, statements, and reports. Clara Evans became the reluctant hero of the story, her courage in coming forward inspiring others to speak out. Families who had been too afraid to question the care their loved ones received came forward, each adding to the chorus that exposed the depths of Royce's deception. Captain Ross, though battle-worn, held a press conference in the town square, her voice ringing out strong and clear. This is a new day for Willow Creek. No longer will power hide behind closed doors. No longer will voices be silenced. The applause that followed wasn't just for her or for the police department. It was for everyone who had waited too long to see justice take root in their town. A week later, Alex found himself back at the Silver Spoon Café. The warmth of the familiar booths and the murmur of conversation wrapped around him like a comfort he hadn't felt in ages. Mia joined him, sliding into the seat across from him, eyes bright with pride. "You did it," she said, reaching for his hand. "You really did it." Alex squeezed her fingers, a smile tugging at his lips. "We did it. Eliza, Clara, everyone who refused to stay silent. It was all of us." The brass bell over the door chimed, and Alex looked up, catching sight of Clara stepping inside. Their eyes met, and she nodded, a small, grateful smile on her face before she disappeared into the crowd. For the first time in what felt like years, Alex took a deep breath and let it out, feeling the weight finally lift. Willow Creek was still the same town it had always been, but now its heart beat a little stronger, a little louder, unburdened by secrets. The days that followed Royce's arrest rippled through Willow Creek like an aftershock, shaking the foundations of old alliances and unearthing buried guilt. Town meetings filled with residents demanding answers, and the hospital board scrambled to distance itself from Royce's tainted legacy. Yet beneath the public displays of anger and shock, there was something else blooming, a fragile, tentative sense of hope. Alex sat at his desk in the police station, the soft clatter of keys and ringing phones providing a familiar background hum. His eyes lingered on the photograph of George Monroe that now rested on his desk, a reminder of why this fight had mattered. The image, provided by Eliza, showed George standing proudly by his woodshop, his hands rough and calloused, but his smile warm. It was a portrait of a man who had been more than just a patient or a data point. Ben appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He placed one in front of Alex and took a sip from the other, eyes scanning the room. "Looks like the DA's office is ready to press charges on everyone involved in Royce's scheme," he said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "This could go higher than we thought." Alex nodded, the coffee's heat warming his tired hands. "Good. The town deserves accountability. This isn't just about Royce anymore. It's about changing the way things are done here." A knock on the glass partition broke their conversation. Captain Ross stood there, her expression unreadable. "Turner, Rivera, in my office. Now." The 2 officers exchanged a glance before following her. Inside, the captain's office was filled with an air of urgency. Ross motioned for them to sit, her fingers tapping a steady beat on the edge of her desk. "We've got word that Royce's legal team is moving fast," Ross began, her voice clipped. "They're trying to argue that his actions, while controversial, were part of advanced medical research aimed at saving lives. If this narrative sticks, it could weaken the case against him and potentially reduce his sentence." The room fell silent. Alex felt a pang of anger stab at his chest. Royce's influence was like a stain that refused to fade, even in the harsh light of justice. Ross's eyes met Alex's, unwavering. "We need to make sure Clara's testimony is airtight. And we need to find more evidence, something that proves he was motivated by ambition, not medical necessity." Ben nodded, already jotting down notes. "I'll re-interview the other nurses from that time. Someone must have heard or seen something." Alex's mind raced, his thoughts leaping to Eliza. She had already given them so much, but perhaps there was more. "I'll talk to Eliza again. There may be something else she remembers." Ross nodded, a rare flicker of hope crossing her features. "Do what you need to. Let's finish this." Eliza's room at the hospital had transformed over the past week. Cards and flowers filled the window ledge, tokens of sympathy and solidarity from those who had heard her story. When Alex entered, she looked up, her eyes brighter than they had been in years. "Officer Turner," she said with a smile. "Come to share more news?" "More questions, I'm afraid," Alex replied, taking the chair beside her bed. Eliza, we need to strengthen the case against Royce. Clara's testimony is crucial, but we need more. Anything you remember from George's final days could help. Eliza's smile faded as her eyes drifted to the window, where the sky was a deep, unwavering blue. There was something, she said softly, almost to herself. The day before George passed, he kept mumbling, half dreaming. He talked about a man, someone who came to his room late at night. At first, I thought it was just the pain playing tricks on his mind. But then, Alex leaned forward, his pulse quickening. What did he say, Eliza? He mentioned that the man was there to make sure he held on. I didn't understand it then, but now I think George was trying to tell me that someone was sent to keep him alive no matter what. Alex's stomach twisted as he considered what that meant. Someone from Royce's team had been enforcing his orders, making sure George didn't slip away before they had everything they needed. Eliza, did he say who this man was? Eliza's brows furrowed, deep lines carving across her forehead. No, but there was a young doctor, new at the time. Tall, dark hair, very serious. I remember because he always wore a white coat, pristine as snow. The description lodged itself in Alex's mind like a splinter. He would find this doctor, no matter how far he had to dig. That evening, Alex and Ben worked side by side in the dim glow of their desk lamps, searching through old employment records and staff lists. The hours dragged by, punctuated only by the scratching of pens and the rustle of papers. Finally, Ben let out a low whistle. Got something? Dr. Aaron Stanton. He was a junior physician on rotation during George's final months, but he left Willow Creek right after Royce's trials were finished. No forwarding address, but he took a position in the state's medical research division. Alex's mind spun with possibilities. Stanton's involvement could be the key to proving Royce's intent and breaking apart any defense he might mount. We need to track him down, Alex said, the weariness in his voice masked by determination. If Stanton confirms what Eliza said, Royce's defense will fall apart. A week later, the courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation and nerves. The trial had drawn statewide attention. Reporters clustered outside like vultures. Royce sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of impassivity, flanked by a team of high-profile lawyers. Clara Evans, her courage bolstered by the support of the town, sat nearby, ready to testify. When Dr. Aaron Stanton was called to the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. His appearance had been secured through a last-minute subpoena, and his presence was the linchpin in the prosecution's case. Stanton took the oath, his eyes darting nervously across the room until they settled on Alex, who gave him a subtle nod. The young doctor swallowed hard before speaking. Yes, I was on duty during George Monroe's final days, Stanton said, voice trembling at first, but gaining strength. I was ordered by Dr. Royce to monitor George, to ensure that life support measures remained intact until all trial data was complete. A collective murmur rippled through the courtroom. Royce's jaw tightened, a brief flicker of panic breaking through his practiced demeanor. Stanton's eyes found Eliza's in the crowd, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I should have come forward sooner, but I was afraid. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, but she nodded, silent forgiveness in her gaze. The truth was finally out. As the judge's gavel came down, sealing Royce's fate with a conviction for medical malpractice, unauthorized trials, and ethical violations, the courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and victory. Outside, the rain had cleared, leaving the air crisp and clean, as if the town itself had taken a breath after years of suffocating under secrets. Alex stood with Ben at the top of the courthouse steps, looking out over the crowd. Mia appeared, weaving through the throng to stand by his side, slipping her hand into his. The warmth of her touch anchored him, reminding him that this victory was more than just a case. It was a new beginning for them all. We did it, Mia whispered, pride shining in her eyes. Alex nodded, watching as Eliza emerged from the courthouse, surrounded by friends and supporters. Her smile, weary but full of peace, was the final piece of the puzzle. George's memory had been honored, and the dark chapters of Willow Creek's story had finally been brought to light. Justice, long overdue, had come, and with it, hope for what lay ahead. The weeks following the trial were a blur of headlines, phone calls, and quiet moments of reflection. Willow Creek was alive with energy, an odd mixture of anger, pride, and hope. Some townspeople grumbled that the town's reputation had been tarnished, but most stood taller, proud that their community had faced its past head-on. Alex Turner sat at the kitchen table, the early morning light creeping through the curtains. Mia moved around him, preparing breakfast with an ease that came from years of shared routines. The kitchen was filled with the smell of eggs and fresh coffee, a comfort Alex hadn't realized he missed until now. "You look lost in thought," Mia said, setting a plate down in front of him. She leaned in, planting a soft kiss on his cheek, her hair brushing against his face. Alex smiled up at her, grateful for her steady presence, just thinking about what's next. Royce's conviction was the beginning, not the end. There's so much to rebuild, trust to restore. Mia's eyes searched his face, her expression tender but thoughtful. "Willow Creek is stronger now because of what you and the others did. It will take time, but we're heading in the right direction." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with an incoming call from Captain Ross. He picked it up, a familiar flicker of urgency sparking to life. "Turner here." Ross's voice was warm but direct. "Alex, I wanted to let you know before the press conference. The hospital board has announced sweeping changes to their policies. They're partnering with independent oversight organizations and setting up scholarships in George Monroe's name. His memory is going to inspire something better." Alex's chest tightened with emotion. "Thank you for telling me, Captain." Ross paused, her tone softening. "You earned this, Alex. Take a moment and let it sink in." After the call ended, Mia's eyes were questioning. Alex shared the news, watching as her smile widened, the weight of their shared burden lifting incrementally. The kitchen seemed brighter, the morning sun casting long streaks of gold across the worn wood of the table. "That's incredible," she said, squeezing his hand. "George's story is going to help so many people." "You made that happen." "No," Alex said, shaking his head. "We did. Eliza, Clara, even Ben. It was a collective fight." Later that day, Alex found himself walking the familiar path to the Silver Spoon Café. The doorbell chimed as he stepped inside, the warmth of the place washing over him like a favorite blanket. Marjorie, the cafe's owner, looked up from behind the counter and broke into a wide smile. "Well, if it isn't the town hero," she teased, her eyes twinkling. Alex chuckled, sliding into his usual booth. "Just trying to get back to normal, Marge." She brought over a steaming cup of coffee and set it down in front of him. "Normal's a good place to be," she said, tapping the edge of the table lightly before returning to her work. Alex took a sip of the coffee, savoring its familiar bitterness. He glanced around the cafe, noting the faces of townsfolk he'd known his whole life, their expressions softer, more open. The town had changed, subtly but unmistakably. People who might have kept their heads down now shared nods and knowing smiles, unified by the trials they'd faced together. The bell above the door chimed again, and Alex looked up to see Clara Evans stepping in. She caught his eye and walked over, her smile tentative but genuine. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Please," Alex said, motioning to the seat across from him. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of everything they'd been through settling around them like an old quilt. "I never got to thank you," Clara said finally, her voice soft, "for believing in me and giving me the courage to come forward." Alex set down his cup, meeting her eyes. "It was your bravery that turned the tide, Clara. Eliza, George, and the people who needed justice. They have you to thank." Clara's eyes glistened as she looked out the window, where a group of children played in the square, their laughter ringing out like a promise. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said, "how something so dark can lead to something good." Alex nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, but it's what we do with it that matters." A moment later the door opened again and Eliza Munro entered, her steps slow but sure. The café seemed to hold its breath as she made her way to Alex and Clara's table. The lines of grief in her face softened by a serenity that had taken its place. "Eliza," Alex said, standing as she reached them. He pulled out a chair, and she sat with a grateful nod. "I heard about the scholarships," Eliza said, her voice trembling but steady. "George would have been so proud." Clara reached across the table and took Eliza's hand. The three sat there, bound by shared loss and newfound hope. The café hummed around them, life continuing, but in that moment, time seemed to still. For the first time in what felt like years, Alex allowed himself to believe that Willow Creek was on its way to healing. George's memory would no longer be defined by the darkness that had claimed him, but by the light that followed, carried forward by those who refused to forget. As the sun began its slow descent, casting warm amber hues across the town, Alex felt the stirrings of peace. Willow Creek, scarred but stronger, stood ready to write a new chapter, one where truth, however hard won, would always find its way into the light. Ring in Willow Creek arrived with a burst of color and sound. The town square, once overshadowed by secrets and whispers, was now filled with life. Tulips in shades of red, yellow, and purple bloomed along the edges of the park, and the fountain in the center gurgled cheerfully as children chased each other in the sunshine. It was as if the town itself had exhaled, releasing a breath held too long. Alex Turner stood near the fountain, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. The cool breeze ruffled his hair, and he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm his face. It had been months since Royce's conviction, and while the man himself was now serving time, the consequences of his ambition continued to echo through Willow Creek. Today, however, was not for regret or anger. Today was for remembering George Munro in a way that honored his life and the legacy he had unintentionally created. The town had gathered for the dedication ceremony of the George Munro Memorial Scholarship, a fund established to support students pursuing medical ethics and public health. It was a small but meaningful way to ensure that mistakes of the past would not be repeated. A makeshift stage stood at the park's edge, decorated with simple white banners and fresh flowers. Captain Ross stood at the podium, her uniform crisp, the silver of her badge catching the light. She cleared her throat, and the low hum of conversation stilled. "Thank you all for being here today," Ross began, her voice steady but touched with emotion. "We come together to remember George Munro, not for how he left us, but for the man he was, kind, strong, and devoted to his community. In his name, we pledge to do better, to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and to ensure that the values of integrity and compassion guide our town." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd, heartfelt and sincere. Alex scanned the faces, catching sight of Eliza Munro standing near the front, flanked by Clara Evans and a few friends who had supported her through the dark days. Eliza's expression was peaceful, the lines of worry around her eyes softer now. Ross continued, gesturing toward a large plaque covered with a white cloth. "This scholarship is only the beginning. It's a promise that we will not forget the lessons learned nor the sacrifices made." With a nod, she pulled the cloth away, revealing the plaque engraved with George's name and the words, "In memory of the lives he touched and the change he inspired." Applause rose again, louder this time. Tears glistened on Eliza's cheeks, but they were tears of release, of closure. Clara reached for her hand, squeezing it as the sun caught the bronze lettering, making it glow. Alex felt Mia's presence beside him before she spoke, her hand slipping into his. "You did it," she whispered. "You all did." He turned to her, the pride in her eyes reflected in his own. "It wasn't just me," Alex said, his voice low but full of conviction. "It was everyone who decided that the truth was worth fighting for." Mia's smile widened, and they stood in comfortable silence as the ceremony concluded. Ross stepped down from the podium, mingling with the crowd, her eyes meeting Alex's with a nod of acknowledgement. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the square as townsfolk lingered to share stories and memories. Alex moved through the crowd, exchanging handshakes and thanks, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Eventually, he found himself back at the fountain, watching the water catch the sunlight in sparkling arcs. Eliza approached, her steps tentative but sure. Alex straightened, meeting her gaze. "Thank you, Alex," she said, her voice still tinged with the emotion of the ceremony. "For not giving up. For George. For me." Alex's smile was small but genuine. "You gave us the strength to see it through, Eliza. This is as much yours as it is anyone's." They stood side by side for a moment, the noise of the square fading to a gentle murmur as the weight of shared understanding settled between them. "I think George would have liked this," Eliza said, her eyes scanning the square, filled with laughter and life. "I think so too," Alex agreed, feeling the truth of it settle deep in his chest. As the evening sky turned from blue to a rich indigo, the stars began to appear, tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the vast canvas. The town, once haunted by secrets, now embraced its scars and the promise of a better tomorrow. Alex watched as the townspeople began to drift away, carrying the day's events home in their hearts. He reached for Mia's hand, their fingers lacing together as they walked down the street toward home. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but it felt brighter now, filled with the echoes of courage and change. And in the heart of Willow Creek, justice had not only been served, it had taken root, ready to grow into something enduring and true. The days following the dedication ceremony were marked by a subtle, pervasive shift in Willow Creek. The energy of the town had transformed, no longer cloaked in whispers, but alive with conversation. People gathered more openly, sharing not only their hopes, but their regrets, ensuring that silence would never again provide cover for misdeeds. Alex Turner walked the familiar route to Willow Creek General Hospital. It had been weeks since the trial, but today he wasn't here to investigate or to probe into hidden records. Instead, he came with a quiet resolve, carrying a letter in his pocket. Eliza Monroe had given it to him the day after the ceremony, a handwritten letter from George. It was a piece of him she had found tucked away in a journal, the ink faded, but the words strong. Inside the hospital, the sterile hallways and muted conversations were unchanged, but to Alex, everything felt different. He passed nurses who offered nods of respect and doctors who paused, giving him small smiles of gratitude. The hospital was no longer the impenetrable place of secrets it once had been. It was a place of healing again. He entered Eliza's room, where she sat in her chair by the window, eyes lost in the garden outside. When she turned to see him, her expression brightened. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. Alex reached into his pocket, pulling out George's letter. "I thought you might want to read this one more time. I know it's special." Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, accepting the letter with trembling fingers. The room fell silent as she unfolded the paper and began to read. "My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to tell you how much I love you. But remember this, our love was the best part of my life. Don't carry the weight of my illness. Let it go and find peace, for yourself and for the good we shared. You are the light that guided me, and I know you will carry on that light for others. Forever yours, George." Eliza's voice cracked on the last words, and she looked up at Alex, her eyes glistening. "I think I'm ready to let go, Alex. Not of him, but of the pain." Alex reached out, placing a hand over hers. "That's exactly what he'd want, Eliza. For you to carry the light forward." Across town, in the quiet office of Captain Ross, the air was charged with discussion. Ben Rivera stood by the window, arms crossed as Ross outlined her plan. "We need to ensure that what happened with Royce doesn't happen again. I'm proposing a community advisory board. Something independent, something powerful enough to hold the hospital accountable." Ben's eyebrows shot up. "That's ambitious, Captain. You really think the town will support it?" Ross smirked, folding her hands on her desk. "They will. Change is messy, Ben, but it's necessary. And after seeing the courage people like Eliza and Clara showed, I believe Willow Creek is ready for it." Ben nodded, a smile breaking through his usual serious demeanor. Count me in. The community center buzzed with activity as volunteers set up chairs, hung banners, and arranged refreshments. The first meeting of the newly formed Willow Creek Community Health Board was about to take place. Alex stood at the back of the room, watching as people filed in, some hesitant, others eager. The board's creation had been fast-tracked by the momentum Royce's trial had generated. Now, residents were ready to use their voices, to be part of the system that would ensure accountability. Clara Evans, now a symbol of bravery in the town, sat at the front, poised to speak. The hum of chatter quieted as she stood, her eyes scanning the room filled with familiar faces. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice steady. "We all know why we're here. To make sure that Willow Creek never becomes a place where silence can shield wrongdoing again." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Alex felt a swell of pride, knowing that the fight had been worth every sleepless night and every hard conversation. Clara continued, recounting her decision to come forward, the fear she'd faced, and the support that had given her strength. "It was the stories we told, the truths we shared, that brought this change. And it will be the same stories that keep it alive." Eliza Monroe, sitting in the second row, nodded. The grief that had once haunted her eyes now looked softened, replaced by something gentler: resolve. Captain Ross took the stage next, outlining the structure of the board and its responsibilities. "This isn't just an oversight committee," she said. "It's a partnership between medical professionals, the police force, and, most importantly, you, the people of Willow Creek. Together, we will protect the heart of this town." The applause that followed was more than just noise. It was a statement. People clapped not just with their hands, but with their hearts, ready to start anew. The first signs of summer edged into the days, bringing warmth and long evenings. Alex walked down Main Street, now bustling with the familiar sounds of children playing and merchants calling out their wares. The darkness that had once loomed over the town seemed like a distant memory, a storm that had passed, leaving behind a cleansed landscape. He met Ben at the corner cafe, where they had planned to catch up. Ben was already seated, a glass of iced tea sweating in the afternoon heat. He lifted it in a mock salute as Alex sat down. "To new beginnings," Ben said, clinking his glass against Alex's coffee cup. Alex chuckled, taking a sip. New beginnings and hard-won peace. They talked about the changes in the town, the challenges that still lay ahead. The new community board had its first official project, a review of all hospital protocols, past and present. There were bound to be hurdles, but for the first time, the town felt ready to face them. "You ever think about what comes next?" Ben asked, squinting into the sun. Alex paused, the question settling into the spaces between them. "Yeah," he said, eyes distant for a moment. "I think there's always going to be something that needs fixing. But that's what keeps us going, right? Making sure we leave things better than we found them." Ben nodded, a rare grin spreading across his face. "Couldn't have said it better myself." The conversation drifted to lighter topics. The upcoming town fair, Mia's plans for a garden, Ben's ongoing project of renovating his old house. They laughed and shared stories, their camaraderie easy and unburdened. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Alex watched as people walked by, waving and smiling. Among them was Eliza, carrying a small basket of flowers. She saw him, and they exchanged a wave, her smile a testament to resilience. For the first time in a long while, Alex felt like the weight of the town's history no longer pressed down on him. Willow Creek had changed, not just in policy or structure, but in its spirit. The community was stronger, bound by the shared belief that silence was not an option, and that justice, no matter how delayed, was always worth pursuing. He turned back to Ben, who was watching him with an amused expression. "Ready to head out?" Ben asked. "Yeah," Alex said, standing up and stretching. The road ahead was uncertain, but that was all right. They'd face it together, ready for whatever came next. And as they walked down Main Street, the future felt wide open, carrying with it the promise of brighter days. The scent of summer deepened as the days lengthened. Willow Creek basked in the kind of warmth that encouraged lazy afternoons and evenings spent under the stars. But beneath the sun-dappled surface, the town continued its journey of rebuilding and reflection. Alex Turner felt the shift in the atmosphere every time he stepped into the Silver Spoon Café, where laughter and conversation now filled the air once occupied by whispers. Today, however, was different. Alex stood at the podium in the town hall, a rare sight that captured the attention of those gathered. The room was filled with community members, many of whom had been involved in the efforts to reform the hospital and bring justice to those like George Monroe. "We've come a long way," Alex began, his voice strong and steady. "But the journey doesn't end here. Willow Creek's story is now a story of resilience, and it's up to us to make sure that the values we fought for remain at the heart of our town." A round of applause filled the room, echoing off the wooden beams and bouncing around the space like a living thing. Clara Evans sat in the front row, her face glowing with a newfound confidence, while Eliza Monroe watched with tear-brimmed eyes. After the meeting, as people filtered out into the sunlit street, Alex found himself face-to-face with Eliza. She reached out, her small hand gripping his forearm, and for a moment, the crowd faded away. "I want you to know," she said, voice steady and sure, "that George would be so proud of what this town has done." "Of what you've done?" Alex felt a lump form in his throat, and he nodded, words failing him. They shared a moment of silence before Eliza patted his arm and walked away, the weight of the past finally lifting from her stooped shoulders. That evening, Alex returned home to find Mia on the porch, a watering can in her hand and dirt smudged on her cheek. She looked up and smiled, the kind that made everything else seem unimportant. "How was the meeting?" she asked, setting the can down and wiping her hands on her jeans. "Good," Alex said, stepping up beside her. "Better than good, actually. It feels like the town is finally coming together." Mia wrapped her arms around him, the scent of fresh soil mingling with the warm summer air. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. They stood there as the last traces of daylight gave way to the soft glow of twilight, and for a moment all was well in Willow Creek. Summer stretched on, and with it came the inevitable challenges that followed change. The newly formed Willow Creek Community Health Board held its first official review of hospital policies, examining patient care, research ethics, and oversight. The room buzzed with debate and dialogue as board members, medical staff, and townspeople aired their concerns and shared ideas. Alex attended as an observer, sitting beside Captain Ross and Ben. The board's chairperson, Clara Evans, presided over the meeting with an ease that spoke of hard-won confidence. She listened carefully, responding with empathy and insight. "We must ensure that no patient is ever left voiceless again," Clara said, her eyes sweeping across the room. "That's the promise we make today and every day moving forward." A man near the back of the room, an older doctor with a gray beard and weary eyes, stood up. "Clara, some of these changes are ambitious. What if the funding doesn't hold? What if the state pushes back?" Clara met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "Then we find a way. We adapt, but we don't compromise. If we're not willing to fight for what's right, then we've learned nothing from what happened." A murmur of agreement moved through the room, bolstering the new direction Willow Creek had chosen. Ross leaned over to Alex, a small smile breaking her typically stern expression. "She's got a fire in her," she whispered. "The kind this town needs." Alex nodded, feeling a familiar surge of pride. Clara's voice was one of many now echoing through Willow Creek, each adding to the strength of the community. As the weeks turned into months, challenges arose. Funding for new hospital programs wavered as state officials debated the value of additional oversight. But the community stood firm. Fundraisers were organized, and local businesses pledged their support. A sense of unity and purpose enveloped the town, carrying it through the difficult days. One afternoon, Alex found himself at the community garden, a project Mia had spearheaded as part of her efforts to bring people together in new ways. He bent to pull weeds from a patch of carrots, the earthy smell grounding him in the present. Ben sauntered over, a bag of mulch slung over one shoulder. "Didn't expect to find you here playing farmer," he teased. Alex smirked, tossing a clump of weeds at him. "It's good for the soul, Rivera. You should try it." Ben chuckled, setting the bag down and taking in the garden, where children laughed as they helped their parents plant flowers and vegetables. It was another sign that life in Willow Creek was beginning to flourish again. The first signs of autumn whispered through the leaves, painting the town in hues of gold and crimson. The cooler air brought with it a sense of reflection, a reminder of how far Willow Creek had come. The scars left by Royce's deception remained, but they were no longer raw. They had become part of the town's story, a testament to its resilience. Alex stood in front of the new George Monroe Memorial Library, built with funds raised by the community and a grant secured by the town's newly appointed advisory board. The library's grand opening was today, and the crowd that had gathered outside buzzed with anticipation. It was more than a place for books. It was a symbol of learning, of the importance of transparency, and the lessons history offered. Eliza Monroe sat in the front row, surrounded by friends and neighbors. Clara stood beside her, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. Captain Ross and Ben joined Alex, their expressions proud as the town's mayor took the stage to speak. "We dedicate this library in the name of George Monroe, a man who, through the courage of those who loved him, inspired change that echoes far beyond these walls." The ribbon was cut, and applause roared. Eliza's face lit up with a smile as she and Clara exchanged looks, the moment steeped in shared triumph. As the crowd filtered into the library's bright interior, Alex walked the aisles, running his fingers along the spines of books as voices murmured around him. He found Mia standing in the children's section, helping a young boy pick out a storybook. The scene filled Alex with a quiet joy. Mia looked up, catching his eye, and mouthed, "We did it!" Alex nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. Willow Creek had been tested, its resolve pushed to the brink, but it had endured. The town was no longer defined by the shadows of its past, but by the light of its future. He turned to watch Eliza sitting by a window, the autumn sun casting a gentle glow around her as she held a book close to her heart. George's memory lived on, not just in the plaque or the scholarship, but in the choices people made each day to be better, to fight for what was right. And as the leaves whispered their song outside, Alex knew that Willow Creek would continue to stand, not because of its walls or buildings, but because of the people who called it home. Winter's first frost arrived overnight, glazing the streets of Willow Creek with a crystalline sheen that sparkled under the morning sun. The town moved at a slower pace, bundled against the chill, but the warmth of renewed purpose was felt in every corner. Alex Turner made his way down Main Street, nodding to familiar faces who passed by, their smiles genuine and their greetings heartfelt. He turned the corner and found himself outside St. Martin's Care Home, the place where they had first spoken to Clara Evans, and where so many residents of Willow Creek found peace in their twilight years. Clara now worked there full-time, her dedication to the town matched by her quiet resilience. Inside, the air was filled with the soft sound of a piano playing in the common room. Clara was seated beside a resident, guiding his gnarled fingers across the keys, creating a halting but beautiful melody. She looked up when she noticed Alex and smiled. "Morning, Officer Turner," she said, her voice light and warm. "Clara," Alex greeted, stepping into the room. He watched as the elderly man beamed with the pride of his small musical victory. "You're keeping busy, I see." She nodded, laughter dancing in her eyes. "It's good to be part of something again, to feel like I'm giving back." They talked for a while, the conversation turning to the continued progress at the hospital and the new projects funded by the George Monroe Memorial Scholarship. Clara's face grew thoughtful, her smile tempered by a hint of nostalgia. "It's strange," she said, glancing at the frost-laced window. "Sometimes I still think about how easy it would have been to stay silent. But then I see how much has changed, and I know that even though it was terrifying, it was worth every moment." Alex reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You gave this town a second chance, Clara. And you gave yourself one, too." The piano's final notes lingered in the air as Alex left St. Martin's, his breath visible in the cold morning light. The road ahead was never certain, but for the first time, it felt like Willow Creek had found its footing on a path worth following. As winter deepened, preparations began for Willow Creek's annual Festival of Lights, a cherished event that transformed the town into a scene from a snow globe. This year's festival carried extra significance, a celebration not just of the season, but of the town's perseverance and newfound unity. Alex and Mia spent the afternoon stringing lights along the eaves of their home, laughter bubbling between them as they worked. The warm glow of the bulbs cut through the early darkness, casting the street in a welcoming light. "Remember last year?" Mia asked, stepping back to admire their work. "We were so tired we just put up a wreath and called it a day." Alex chuckled, wiping his hands. "Yeah, I remember. Things were different then." Mia turned to him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lights. "And now look at us. It's like the whole town is waking up." They stood side by side, watching as their neighbors decorated, children's laughter ringing out over the hum of conversation. Across the street, Eliza Monroe could be seen helping a group of kids hang garlands on a lamppost. She caught Alex's eye and waved, her smile wide and full of life. The festival began with a procession through the town square, where each building and shop was illuminated by thousands of twinkling lights. The air was filled with the scent of cinnamon, roasted chestnuts, and the crisp bite of winter. The townsfolk gathered, bundled in coats and scarves, eyes bright with anticipation. Captain Ross stood on a small stage at the center of the square, flanked by Clara and Eliza. When she spoke, her voice was rich with emotion. This year, the Festival of Lights represents more than just the season. It represents a light that we kept burning through hard times, a light that brought us through the dark and into a place where hope can thrive. The crowd erupted into applause as the main switch was flipped and the square exploded into brilliance. The trees were draped in strings of lights, casting a soft glow over the snow-covered ground. Laughter, music, and the murmur of old friends reconnecting filled the air. Alex stood with Mia, watching as Ben joined them, a wool hat pulled low over his ears. "Think we did all right this year?" Ben asked, grinning. "We did better than all right," Alex said, his eyes sweeping across the scene. The days after the Festival of Lights were quieter, but they carried with them a sense of satisfaction. The warmth of the event lingered, knitting people closer together as the year came to a close. Alex sat in his office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across his desk. A knock at the door broke his reverie, and Captain Ross entered, her expression soft. "I thought you'd like to know," she began, folding her arms as she leaned against the frame. "The state's review board has officially commended Willow Creek for its community-led health initiatives. We're now seen as a model for towns our size." Alex felt a smile spread across his face. "That's the kind of change we needed." Ross nodded, her eyes warming. "It's the kind of change you helped make happen, Alex. Don't ever forget that." He nodded, the acknowledgement settling over him like a blanket on a cold day. After Ross left, Alex stood and looked out the window. The town stretched before him, quiet and resolute. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And it would continue to be, as long as they kept moving forward. That night, Alex and Mia joined Eliza and Clara for dinner at the Silver Spoon Café, where Marjorie had set a special table by the window. The four of them shared stories, laughter, and memories, the conversations punctuated by the clink of glasses and the glow of candlelight. Eliza raised her glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "To George, and to all of us who learned to fight for what's right." The toast was met with nods and murmurs of agreement, the moment deepened by a shared understanding. As the night wore on, the snow began to fall outside, blanketing the town in a fresh coat of white. Alex watched it drift down, each flake unique, each one contributing to the softening of the landscape. He reached for Mia's hand under the table and squeezed it gently. The road ahead would have its challenges, but as long as they faced it together, with hope, courage, and an unyielding commitment to justice, they would be ready. And so, Willow Creek continued to stand, strong and resilient, a town reborn from its own shadows, moving into a future shaped by the lessons of its past and the light of its people. The quiet of midwinter settled over Willow Creek, muffling the town under a blanket of fresh snow. The streets, now familiar but transformed by a season of change, were a reminder of how far the town had come. Alex Turner found himself walking down Main Street early one morning, boots crunching on snow that glistened in the pale light. He stopped in front of the George Monroe Memorial Library, its brick facade standing proudly against the silver sky. A sign on the door announced a special winter reading event for children, sponsored by the Scholarship Fund in George's name. The sight brought a warmth to Alex's chest, a reminder that George's legacy had woven itself into the fabric of the town's future. The door opened, and Clara Evans stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat and scarf. She spotted Alex and waved, her breath visible in the crisp air. "Early start?" she called, a smile lighting her face. Alex chuckled, moving toward her. "Habit. Plus, it's good to see how things are running here." Clara's eyes sparkled with pride as she glanced back at the library. "It's thriving. More kids than ever are showing up to read, learn, and ask questions. It feels right." "It is," Alex agreed, looking past Clara to where a group of children's books stood propped on a table near the window. "And it's because of people like you and Eliza that we're here today." Clara blushed slightly, the cold painting her cheeks. "It was a team effort. Besides, Willow Creek needed this. We all needed it." A comfortable silence followed, filled only by the distant sounds of snow shovels and the occasional bark of a dog. It was the kind of peace Alex had longed for during the dark days of Royce's trial. A peace that was hard-earned and fragile, but real. As the weeks passed, Willow Creek began to show signs of enduring change. The hospital board announced new training programs for staff focused on patient advocacy and ethical care. Community events flourished, each one a testament to the town's newfound unity and purpose. One evening, Captain Ross gathered her senior officers in the police station for an update. The room was warm with the shared camaraderie of colleagues who had weathered a storm together. Ben leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a rare smile playing at his lips as he watched Alex take his seat. "Thank you all for coming," Ross began, her eyes sweeping the room. "I wanted to take a moment to recognize the efforts that have gone into making Willow Creek stronger, safer, and more transparent." The officers nodded, the weight of their collective efforts not lost on anyone present. Ross's gaze found Alex, and she paused for a heartbeat. "Officer Turner, your work was crucial to this change. Your integrity, your determination, it's inspired more than just our department. It set a new standard for what we stand for." A round of applause filled the room, punctuated by murmurs of agreement. Alex, not used to being in the spotlight, felt heat rise to his face. He gave a small nod, gratitude tightening his throat. "It wasn't just me," he said, voice steady. "It was all of us, and the town itself." After the meeting, Ben clapped Alex on the back as they walked out into the icy night. "Looks like you're a local hero now," Ben joked, the teasing laced with genuine pride. "Don't let it get to my head," Alex replied with a laugh. But the warmth in his chest told him that for once, he didn't mind the recognition. Not because he craved it, but because it meant that the fight had meant something lasting. Spring came early, melting the snow into rivulets that wound their way through the cobblestone streets. Willow Creek bustled with life as the air turned warmer, the scent of new beginnings on every breeze. Alex and Mia walked hand in hand through the market, their eyes catching on the vibrant stalls overflowing with fresh produce, flowers, and homemade crafts. "I can't remember the last time the market felt this alive," Mia said, squeezing Alex's hand as they paused to look at a display of honey jars. "It's different now," Alex said, his eyes scanning the crowd. He caught sight of Eliza Monroe, who was chatting with a group of women near a booth selling woven blankets. The smile on her face was no longer rare. It was frequent, bright, and genuine. Nearby, a teenager with a camera snapped photos, documenting the market for a school project funded by the scholarship program. Clara had insisted that part of George's legacy include encouraging creative expression. The thought made Alex's heart swell with pride. They continued through the market until they reached the Silver Spoon Café, where Marjorie waved them over. "I saved your favorite booth," she called, her eyes twinkling. They settled into the booth, the comfort of the café wrapping around them like a well-worn quilt. Ben joined them a few minutes later, sliding in with his usual grin. "Looks like I picked the right day for coffee," he said, raising an eyebrow at the busy market outside. The conversation turned to the new projects being launched around town. A mentorship program for young people interested in law enforcement, a series of community forums led by Clara, and Captain Ross's push for more training in community engagement. "Willow Creek isn't just surviving," Mia said, looking around at her friends. "It's growing." Alex nodded, taking in the warmth, the laughter, and the sense of belonging. "And we're part of it," he said, more to himself than anyone else. The seasons cycled through their paces, and with them, Willow Creek continued its transformation. The wounds from Royce's trial had long healed, leaving behind scars that served as reminders rather than burdens. The town had come to understand that progress didn't mean erasing the past, but learning from it. One summer afternoon, Alex sat on his front porch, watching as Mia tended to the garden she had planted months ago. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors vibrant under the bright sun. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the wooden slats creak beneath him, and let out a contented sigh. "Thinking about the past?" Mia asked, glancing at him over her shoulder, a playful smile on her lips. "Always," Alex replied, his gaze drifting to the distant hills, but mostly thinking about the future. The sound of children's laughter drew his attention to the street, where a group of kids raced by on their bikes, carefree and full of life. Among them, Alex spotted a boy whose laughter rang out louder than the others. A boy whose family had benefited from the scholarship program. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to that family. "To the town?" Mia walked over and sat beside him, her hand finding his. "It's a good future," she said softly. Alex squeezed her hand, looking into her eyes. "Yeah, it is." Across town, the library doors swung open, and Eliza Monroe walked out with Clara at her side, a basket of books tucked under her arm. They paused on the library steps, exchanging stories as the sun set behind them, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. Willow Creek had faced its darkest moments and come out stronger, not because of one person, but because of many. The town now stood as a testament to what could be achieved when people chose to face the truth, no matter how painful, and build something better from it. And as the last light of day faded into the calm of night, Alex knew that Willow Creek's best days were still ahead. The past had shaped them, but it was their courage and unity that would define their future. Summer's heat gave way to the gentle embrace of autumn, painting Willow Creek in shades of amber and crimson. The air was crisp and carried the familiar scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Alex Turner sat in the bustling town square, sipping a cup of cider as he watched the community moving with a purpose that still amazed him. Every corner of the town seemed to hum with energy, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence that had once loomed. Mia joined him, her cheeks pink from the chill, and handed him a slice of apple pie wrapped in a napkin. "Marjorie's trying out new recipes for the Harvest Festival," she said, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "We're her taste testers." Alex took a bite, savoring the warm, spiced filling. "She's outdone herself," he said, wiping a crumb from his lip. He glanced at the stage being erected at the far end of the square, a sign for the upcoming festival, which promised an evening of music, dancing, and storytelling. The festival had always been a beloved tradition in Willow Creek, but this year it felt like more than just a celebration. It was a testament to survival and the promise of renewal. For the first time in years, it wasn't clouded by unsaid things. It was bright and full of life. Ben strolled over, balancing a steaming cup in one hand and tipping his hat with the other. "Looks like the whole town's going to show up for this," he said, nodding to the workers setting up lanterns that would glow long into the night. "And from what I hear, Clara's planning something special." Mia's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What is it? You know how she loves a good surprise." Ben shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. She's keeping it close to the vest, but if I had to guess, it's something to remind us of why we're here. Alex exchanged a look with Mia, a warmth spreading through him. This was Willow Creek now, a place that had taken its pain and woven it into something beautiful. The evening of the Harvest Festival arrived with the first frost glittering on the rooftops and the smell of mulled cider perfuming the air. Strings of golden lanterns hung above the town square, casting a warm glow on the faces gathered below. The townspeople moved through the decorated space, bundled in scarves and coats, laughing as they stopped to sample homemade jams, pies, and hot soups. Alex walked hand in hand with Mia, taking in the scene. The stage was now complete, draped with garlands of dried corn husks and flowers. Clara stood at its center, a microphone in hand, her eyes scanning the crowd as she waited for the noise to settle. "Good evening, everyone," Clara's voice rang out, clear and confident. "This festival is about more than just celebrating the harvest. It's about honoring what we've built together. And tonight, I want to share something special." A hush fell over the crowd as Clara gestured to Eliza Monroe, who stepped onto the stage to stand beside her. Eliza carried a small wooden box, and when she opened it, the glow of candlelight illuminated the contents, a set of wooden carvings, each depicting a different scene from Willow Creek's history. The figures were detailed and carefully made, carved by George Monroe himself before his illness had taken hold. "These were George's," Eliza said, her voice strong despite the emotion trembling beneath it. "He created them to remind us of who we are, where we come from, and what we're capable of." She lifted one carving, a depiction of the old town hall with children playing in front of it, and placed it on the edge of the stage. The crowd erupted in applause, the weight of the moment resonating deeply. It wasn't just about the festival, it was about remembering that they were part of something bigger, something enduring. Tears welled in Alex's eyes, and he felt Mia squeeze his hand. For a long moment, the square was silent, save for the gentle rustle of the wind. Then, the music started up, a lively folk tune that broke the solemnity and turned it into celebration. People began to dance, their movements weaving together like the patterns in an old quilt. Ben found Alex in the crowd and clapped him on the shoulder. "Did I tell you she had something special planned, or what?" Alex laughed, the sound breaking free of him like a bird taking flight. "You were right," he said. "This is more than special. It's perfect." The weeks after the festival were filled with new beginnings. Clara was appointed to a permanent position on the Community Health Board, her name now synonymous with courage and resilience. The board's initiatives were gaining attention beyond Willow Creek, attracting interest from nearby towns eager to replicate its model. Alex found himself busier than ever, fielding calls from law enforcement officials and health advocates wanting to learn how Willow Creek had turned its darkest hour into a beacon of reform. Captain Ross, now a local hero in her own right, worked alongside him to create training programs focused on community trust and ethical decision-making. One crisp afternoon, Alex sat at his desk, paperwork spread out before him, when Ben walked in, his face flushed with excitement. "Guess who just got an invite to present at the State Conference on Public Safety and Ethics?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." "Nope," Ben said, slapping a letter down on the desk. "They want you and Ross to share what happened here. They're calling it the Willow Creek Initiative." Alex stared at the letter, the weight of its significance pressing down on him. Willow Creek's story would no longer be just theirs. It would serve as an example to others. Proof that change was possible even in the most unlikely places. Ross entered the office, catching sight of the letter and smiling knowingly. "Looks like we're hitting the road, Turner. You ready for that?" Alex stood, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Ready as I'll ever be, Captain." The state conference was held in a grand old building with marble floors and soaring ceilings. The audience was filled with law enforcement officers, healthcare professionals, and civic leaders, all eager to hear the story that had put Willow Creek on the map for more than just its scenic views. Alex felt a familiar knot of nerves as he stepped up to the podium, but a glance at Captain Ross beside him steadied him. She nodded, the gesture subtle but filled with reassurance. "Thank you for being here," Alex began, the microphone amplifying his voice to every corner of the room. "A year ago, Willow Creek faced a darkness that threatened to tear it apart. But we learned that even in the hardest times, there is always light. You just have to choose to see it and fight for it." Ross took over, detailing the steps that led to the formation of the Community Health Board and the new ethical standards that had transformed their police department and hospital. The room was silent, each listener captivated, absorbing the lessons like thirsty ground after rain. When the presentation ended, the room erupted into applause. As Alex stepped back from the podium, a young woman in the front row raised her hand. "Officer Turner, what advice would you give to communities trying to make similar changes?" Alex considered her question. The faces of Eliza, Clara, and everyone who had stood up to be counted flashing through his mind. "Don't be afraid to tell the truth, even when it's hard," he said. "And remember, change starts with one person's courage, but grows when everyone decides to stand together." The applause was deafening, and as Alex looked out over the sea of faces, he knew that the story of Willow Creek had become more than just theirs. It was a call to action. Returning to Willow Creek felt different this time. The town seemed to glow with the pride of being known not for the shadows of its past, but for the light it now shared. Alex stepped out of his car, inhaling the cool, familiar air. The town square was bustling with people preparing for another community gathering, this one celebrating the recognition they had received from the state. Mia met him at the edge of the square, her eyes shining. "Welcome back, State Speaker," she teased, pulling him into a hug. "Missed you," Alex whispered into her hair, holding her close. They joined the crowd, where Captain Ross, Ben, and Clara were already mingling, sharing stories and laughter. Eliza sat with a group of children, reading from one of George's favorite books, her voice carrying over the noise with a warmth that touched everyone nearby. As the sky turned a deep, velvety blue, lanterns were lit, casting their golden glow over the square. The people of Willow Creek gathered around, their faces illuminated not just by the lights, but by the shared sense of what they had built together. Alex looked around, his chest tight with emotion. The town had come full circle, from secrets and silence to laughter and shared strength. He took Mia's hand, holding it tightly as they watched the lanterns flicker and sway in the breeze. Willow Creek's story was no longer one of tragedy. It was one of hope, woven through with lessons of resilience and the power of truth. And as the town looked ahead, it was with eyes wide open, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that together they could withstand anything. Spring in Willow Creek brought with it a flurry of new projects and plans. The community garden, which Mia had lovingly nurtured, expanded into a cooperative space where residents could gather, share stories, and teach the younger generation about sustainable living. Alex spent more of his evenings there, helping tend to the growing rows of vegetables and herbs. The garden had become a place of healing, where laughter and the rustling of leaves spoke of renewal. One evening, while planting a new bed of lavender, Alex looked up to see Clara Evans walking down the path toward him, her expression a mixture of excitement and nerves. "Alex, I just got the call," she said, breathless from the walk. "The state wants to interview us for a documentary on community-led reform." Alex's eyebrows shot up. "A documentary? That's incredible." Clara nodded, eyes bright. "They want to tell the full story. Not just the trial, but the aftermath, the changes, the people. It'll be shown statewide." The news settled over Alex like a warm blanket. The thought of Willow Creek's story inspiring others felt almost surreal. "We'll do it," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "This town deserves to be known for more than what we survived. It deserves to be known for what we've built." Mia walked over, wiping soil from her hands as she caught the last part of the conversation. "Sounds like Willow Creek is about to become famous," she said, a note of pride in her voice. "Maybe just a little," Alex replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. They stood together as the sun set over the garden, the light golden and full of promise. The documentary crew arrived in late spring, their equipment and bustling energy bringing a new sense of excitement to the town. Interviews were conducted in familiar places, the hospital where George Monroe's story began, the library that now bore his name, and the cafe that had been a witness to whispered conversations and plans that changed everything. Clara sat on the front steps of the library for her interview, the camera capturing the light that filtered through the branches overhead. "Willow Creek taught me that silence can be dangerous," she said, her voice strong but tender. "But it also taught me that truth is powerful, and that a community willing to stand together can overcome anything." Eliza Monroe's segment was filmed by the window of her home with framed photos of George and their family around her. She spoke of love, loss, and resilience, her eyes misting as she recounted George's last days. "George always said that the heart of a town is its people. I see that heart in every neighbor who chose to speak up, to fight for what's right." Alex's turn came last, filmed outside the police station with Captain Ross by his side. "We learned that leadership isn't just about authority, it's about responsibility. It's about listening to the people you serve and remembering that justice is not just a word, but an action." The filming wrapped up with scenes from the festival, shots of the town square bustling with life, and moments of quiet reflection by the river that cut through Willow Creek. The documentary would be broadcast in a month, and anticipation simmered in the air like a well-kept secret. The day the documentary aired, the town square was transformed into an outdoor theater, complete with a large screen and rows of folding chairs. Families bundled in blankets, and children sat cross-legged on the ground, excitement crackling through the crowd. Alex sat in the middle of the gathering, Mia at his side, and Ben on his other, their breath visible in the cool evening air. Clara was a few rows ahead with Eliza, the two of them chatting quietly as they waited. The opening credits rolled, and the crowd fell silent. The familiar scenes of Willow Creek filled the screen, but they were interwoven with voices and stories that told of fear, courage, and, ultimately, triumph. When the camera cut to Clara's face as she recounted her decision to come forward, the audience listened with rapt attention. Gasps and murmurs of understanding punctuated Eliza's heartfelt recounting of George's life, and tears filled many eyes as the story reached the climactic court scenes. The documentary ended with sweeping shots of the town square at night, the lights of the Harvest Festival casting a golden glow, and Clara's final words echoing in the darkness. "Willow Creek isn't just a place. It's a testament to what we can be when we refuse to let silence win." Applause broke out, strong and sustained, as people rose to their feet. Alex felt Mia's hand slip into his, her fingers tightening around his own. He turned to see Clara wiping away tears, smiling as Eliza embraced her. Ben leaned over, his usual humor tempered by awe. "Looks like we've become the role models we needed." Alex grinned, pride swelling in his chest. "And now others will know that they can be too." The documentary's impact was immediate and powerful. Letters poured in from towns across the state, some congratulatory, others seeking advice. Willow Creek was now a beacon of resilience, a symbol of what was possible when a community stood together. Clara received an invitation to speak at a national conference on ethical reform, and Captain Ross was approached by state officials looking to incorporate similar changes across their own departments. One evening, Alex and Mia attended a community meeting where plans for expanding the scholarship fund were discussed. A new wing of the library was proposed, focusing on social justice and community education. Eliza Monroe, now a permanent fixture at community events, stood and addressed the room. "George would be proud of what this town has become. But more than that, he would be proud of each of you. We are not just living, we are leading." The room erupted in applause, and Alex exchanged a look with Mia that spoke volumes. Willow Creek was no longer just their home. It was a place that had defined them, shaped them, and shown them that hope was not just an abstract concept, but a living, breathing thing. As the seasons turned once more, summer settled over Willow Creek, blanketing it in warmth and the hum of cicadas. The town had grown, not in size but in spirit. The changes they had fought for were now an integral part of its identity, and Alex felt a deep, enduring pride every time he walked down Main Street. One morning, as the sun rose golden over the town, Alex and Mia stood on their porch, coffee cups in hand. The sound of children playing echoed from the square, where new murals painted by local artists depicted scenes from the town's story, the trials, the festival, the harvest, and finally, the lantern-lit square symbolizing hope. "Do you think we'll ever stop talking about it?" Mia asked, her voice soft and thoughtful. Alex took a sip of coffee, considering her question. "I hope not. It's a reminder that we don't have to be perfect, just willing to do what's right." Mia nodded, a smile spreading slowly across her face. "Then I guess we're right where we need to be." Alex looked out over Willow Creek, where Clara and Eliza stood in the garden, chatting as they worked. Captain Ross walked by with Ben, discussing a new initiative with animated gestures. The town was alive, a testament to what could be achieved when truth found its voice and courage refused to falter. And as Alex stood there, watching the sun climb higher, he knew that the story of Willow Creek was far from over. It would continue in the hands of the people, in the laughter of the children, in the lessons passed from one generation to the next. The town's journey was not just a memory, it was a living legacy, ready to inspire new chapters yet unwritten. As autumn approached again, Willow Creek found itself more unified than ever before. The lessons of the past year had settled into the bones of the town, creating a foundation for new initiatives that reached far beyond the boundaries of its quiet streets. The town square, once a symbol of stagnation and old wounds, had become a vibrant hub of activity. Alex Turner had never been busier, but the kind of busyness that now filled his days was different. It was no longer a scramble to piece together fragmented truths. It was the work of sustaining progress. Community meetings were held weekly, where everyone, from young parents to retirees, felt comfortable sharing their thoughts. One night, Alex attended a town hall meeting with Mia by his side. Clara Evans stood at the front, discussing plans to expand the scholarship fund to include internships at Willow Creek General Hospital, aimed at teaching ethical medical practices. The crowd murmured in approval, their nods affirming that the town's growth wasn't just a wave, it was a tide that wouldn't recede. Eliza Monroe spoke next, her voice clear and steady. "This isn't just about honoring George's memory anymore. It's about what we do next. It's about showing that courage isn't just a moment, but a way of life." Applause echoed through the room, filling it with a warmth that seemed to seep into the walls. Alex exchanged a glance with Mia, her eyes glowing with pride. The work they had done was bearing fruit, and it was being tended by hands eager to keep it growing. As autumn leaves began to fall, Alex took a moment to reflect on how connected the town had become. One Saturday morning, he walked through the community garden where children were learning to plant vegetables as part of a new school program. The garden had expanded thanks to volunteers and donations, becoming a symbol of shared effort. Ben Rivera appeared, holding a watering can and grinning at the sight of Alex. "Never thought I'd see the day where this garden needed traffic control," Ben joked, gesturing to the kids running between rows of tomato plants and marigolds. Alex laughed, the sound light and unburdened. "It's a good problem to have." Clara, who had become a local celebrity in her own right, was leading a group of teenagers in a discussion about ethical decision-making. Her voice, once hesitant and uncertain, now carried confidently over the chatter. "That's why transparency matters," she said, catching Alex's eye and offering a smile before turning back to her group. "It's what keeps a community strong." Eliza Monroe sat at a small table nearby, teaching a young girl how to make flower crowns. She looked up as Alex passed, nodding in quiet recognition of the journey they had all shared. The connections between these people, once frayed and fragmented, were now strong threads woven into the fabric of Willow Creek. The annual Willow Creek Art Fair took on new significance this year. The fair, which traditionally featured local artisans and craftspeople, now included an exhibit titled Echoes of Courage, curated by the town's youth. It showcased paintings, sculptures, and photographs that told the story of the past year's journey, moments of fear, acts of bravery, and the joy that followed. Alex and Mia wandered through the exhibit, their eyes taking in the vibrant depictions of shared history. One painting by a high school student caught Alex's attention. It showed George Monroe in his workshop, a serene smile on his face as he carved a piece of wood. Behind him, the scene depicted glowing figures of people: Clara, Eliza, and even Alex himself, each holding a lantern. "Do you see this?" Mia said, pointing at the background. "That's you." Alex nodded, the sight striking a chord deep within him. The artist had captured not just the past, but the hope that had emerged from it. He felt the pulse of the town's collective resilience in every brushstroke, in every curve of George's smile. Clara approached, eyes wide with awe at the exhibit. "The kids did an incredible job, didn't they?" she said, her voice tinged with pride. "They really did," Mia agreed. "It's amazing to see how they've absorbed everything that's happened." Clara's smile turned bittersweet. "They're the next generation. If we've done our job, they'll carry this forward." The wind began to bite as winter approached, carrying with it a sense of preparation. The documentary on Willow Creek's transformation had brought visitors and interest from beyond the state, and people came to see the town that had risen from shadows into light. But the attention didn't change the heart of Willow Creek. It only strengthened it. Captain Ross announced her retirement during a town meeting, her voice steady as she addressed her colleagues and friends. "I've watched this town grow into something remarkable," she said. "It's been the greatest honor of my career to stand beside you all and witness what we've built." The room erupted in applause, and Alex felt a tug of emotion. Ross had been more than a captain. She had been a guide and a pillar. When she stepped down from the podium, she pulled Alex into a hug, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "It's your time now, Turner," she said, her voice low but sure. "Lead well." "I'll do my best," Alex replied, the words heavy with promise. The first snowfall of winter dusted the town, frosting rooftops and blanketing the hills in white. Alex stood at the window of his office, now with a new title on the door, Chief of Police. The promotion was not just a step up. It was a testament to the journey he had taken, to the people who had walked it with him. Mia entered carrying a thermos of hot cocoa. "I thought you could use a break," she said, her smile radiant. Alex took the thermos, his fingers brushing hers. "You know me too well." They stood side by side, watching as children played in the snow outside, their laughter muffled by the glass. The mural on the side of the library caught Alex's eye, an image of lanterns strung across the square, representing the light that Willow Creek had embraced. "Do you think it'll always be this way?" Mia asked softly. "This feeling of hope?" Alex took a deep breath, the scent of cocoa and winter filling his senses. "As long as we choose it, yes. Hope is a choice, and this town has learned how to make it." Mia nodded, her eyes bright with the future. "Then let's keep choosing it." As the town carried on outside, with its snow-dusted buildings and the warmth of community in every corner, Alex felt a deep sense of peace. Willow Creek's story was not a tale of perfection. It was a testament to resilience, to facing what was broken and finding a way to make it whole again. And as long as there were people willing to stand for what was right, the light of the town would never fade. With Mia's hand in his, and the quiet strength of the town at his back, Alex knew that Willow Creek's story would continue, brighter and stronger with each passing season. The crisp air of deep winter wrapped around Willow Creek, painting the town in shades of silver and blue. Snow piled in soft mounds along the cobblestone streets, and icicles sparkled like crystal daggers from rooftops. Despite the chill, the town remained lively, a testament to the resilience its people had cultivated. Alex Turner, now officially the Chief of Police, moved through the station with an ease that came from familiarity, but bore the weight of new responsibilities. His promotion had been met with celebration and a surge of support, but with it came the quiet pressure of leadership. He found himself in moments of reflection, wondering if he could match the legacy of Captain Ross. One afternoon, as he reviewed reports at his desk, Clara Evans knocked on the open door and poked her head inside. "Chief Turner," she teased, a smile lifting her voice. "Got a minute?" "Always," Alex said, leaning back and gesturing for her to come in. Clara stepped into the room, holding a folder that looked worn from handling. "I was thinking about what comes next," she said, placing it on the desk. "We've done so much, but I think it's time to extend our work beyond Willow Creek. Alex raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Beyond? Clara nodded, eyes alight with excitement. An outreach program? We could share our journey with other towns facing their own struggles. Show them that change is possible. Alex's smile grew as he imagined the possibilities. You're talking about creating a network, something that other places can use as a blueprint. Exactly, Clara said, her voice gaining strength. And with your new position, I thought you might want to help lead it. The idea simmered between them, filled with potential. Alex knew that Willow Creek's legacy could be more than just its own story. It could become a spark for others. The plan for the Willow Creek Outreach Program gained momentum quickly. Clara's passion was contagious, and soon, meetings were held in the library's community room, filled with residents eager to support the initiative. Eliza Monroe took on a key role, using her story to inspire hope and courage in others. Ben Rivera, now one of Alex's most trusted officers, joined the effort with enthusiasm. If we can help even one town the way we've helped ours, it'll be worth it, he said during a meeting, his voice rich with conviction. Clara stood before a map pinned to the wall, marked with small red dots representing communities that had reached out to them. We'll start with these 3, she said, pointing to nearby towns facing their own crises. Each one a reminder that the struggles Willow Creek had overcome were not unique. Mia sat in the back, taking notes and organizing the outreach plans. She glanced at Alex, their eyes meeting across the room. The pride she felt radiated in her gaze, and Alex felt it anchor him. This was their new chapter, and they were ready for it. The outreach team's first visit was to a town called Hollow Point, a place whose name had come up repeatedly in letters and calls. The town, once prosperous, had been dealing with economic downturns and a fractured community that mirrored Willow Creek's past. Alex, Clara, and Eliza traveled together, their conversation a mixture of strategy and stories from home. As they entered Hollow Point, the differences were stark. The buildings stood tall but weary, their paint peeling and their windows dark. The town hall meeting drew a hesitant crowd, their expressions guarded but curious. Clara spoke first, her voice steady and compassionate. She told them about George, about the trials Willow Creek had faced, and the courage it had taken to stand up to the truth. We're not here to tell you what to do, she concluded. We're here to show you that hope is possible, even when it seems far away. The silence that followed was thick, but then an older man in the back stood up, his hat clutched in rough, weathered hands. If Willow Creek could find its way, maybe we can too. The room's mood shifted, the seeds of trust beginning to take root. After the meeting, people approached Clara and Eliza, their questions laced with hope. Alex stood back, watching as connections formed. It was the beginning of something bigger, something that could ripple beyond Willow Creek. The outreach visits continued over the following months. Each town brought new challenges, but also new stories of resilience and determination. Willow Creek's people, who had once needed inspiration, now became the source of it. Clara's leadership shone as she spoke at town halls, sharing not just the victories, but the hard truths of what it took to get there. Eliza's presence was a reminder that strength could be found in the quiet moments, in the willingness to face loss and turn it into something meaningful. Each time she shared George's story, it was as though a weight lifted, not just from her shoulders, but from the hearts of those who listened. Back in Willow Creek, life continued to evolve. Captain Ross's retirement had not ended her involvement. She visited often, lending advice and offering guidance as Alex navigated his new role. Ben began mentoring younger officers, passing on the lessons he had learned about justice and the importance of community. Mia worked closely with the town's new initiatives, organizing workshops and events that focused on unity and progress. Her laughter could often be heard drifting from the community garden or the library, where children gathered to hear stories read aloud. The town's spirit reached far beyond its borders now, and Alex found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From the shadows of a scandal to the bright promise of a better future. Willow Creek was no longer just a town defined by its past. It was a beacon for others finding their way. A year after the launch of the outreach program, Willow Creek hosted a gathering for the towns they had helped. The event was held in the square under strings of twinkling lights, reminiscent of the festival that had rekindled their hope. Representatives from towns like Hollow Point, now revitalized and bustling, came to share their progress. Alex stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as people exchanged stories and laughter. He spotted Clara deep in conversation with a young woman from Hollow Point who had taken charge of her town's new community initiative. Eliza stood nearby, listening with a smile that spoke of quiet pride. Captain Ross approached, a glass of cider in her hand. "Look at what you've done," she said, nodding toward the crowd. "It's what we've done," Alex corrected, eyes meeting hers. "I couldn't have done it without everyone here." Ross chuckled, the sound warm. "I think you finally understand what I meant when I said you were ready." Mia joined them, slipping her arm around Alex's waist. "It's like the town has grown wings," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "More than that," Alex replied, the light from the lanterns reflecting in his eyes. "It's found its purpose." As the evening stretched on, stories were told, songs were sung, and Willow Creek's journey was shared in full. The past year had been one of transformation, not just for the town, but for everyone who called it home. And as they stood together under the canopy of stars, the future seemed limitless. Alex looked around at the faces he had come to know so well, the friends who had become family, the town that had become an emblem of resilience. They had taken the hardest parts of their story and turned them into the foundation of something new. The echoes of laughter and music filled the square, and Alex Turner knew that this was just the beginning. Willow Creek's story would live on, carried by those who chose hope, those who dared to change, and those who would come after, ready to write their own chapters in the light of a town that refused to be forgotten. The gathering in Willow Creek marked more than just a celebration. It was a milestone that cemented the town's place as a model of resilience. As the months passed, stories of their journey found their way into magazines, newspapers, and university lectures. The Willow Creek Outreach Program became a fixture, expanding its reach to towns and cities eager to learn how to rebuild from within. Alex Turner found himself at the heart of this movement, traveling more often than he had anticipated. He spoke at conferences and seminars, his words filled with lessons learned and hard-won victories. Yet, each time he returned to Willow Creek, the sight of the town filled him with a profound sense of belonging. One afternoon, as Alex stepped into the Silver Spoon Café, the familiar chime of the doorbell ringing above him, he was met with a surprise. Marjorie, the cafe's owner, handed him a glossy magazine with a proud grin. "Look at this, Chief," she said, tapping the cover. It featured a photograph of Willow Creek's town square, lanterns glowing in the dusk. With the headline, "The Town That Chose Hope," the story of Willow Creek's transformation. Alex's breath caught as he thumbed through the article, seeing quotes from Eliza, Clara, and even Captain Ross. It told of the trials they had faced and the unity that had emerged. Mia entered the cafe just as Alex reached the end of the article, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, leaning over to see the magazine. A smile bloomed on her face. "The whole world is finally seeing what we've always known." Alex nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "It's more than I could have imagined." As winter settled in, the town prepared for another festival of lights, this time with visitors from the towns they had helped. Hollow Point's mayor, a kind man named Samuel Carter, arrived with a delegation to share in the festivities. His town had flourished under the guidance inspired by Willow Creek's example, and now he returned the favor with stories of their own success. Eliza Monroe hosted a gathering at the library, sharing George's carvings and the lessons he had left behind. Children marveled at the wooden figures, their eyes wide as Eliza explained their history. "That's George's heart," she told them, her voice warm. "It beats in every act of kindness we share." Clara and Alex stood in the back, watching the scene unfold. Clara sighed, a smile on her lips. "Can you believe how far we've come?" "It's more than I ever dreamed," Alex admitted. The joy of seeing these moments, of witnessing hope passed down, filled him with pride. This was the legacy they had built, one moment at a time. The night of the Festival of Lights was colder than usual, but the chill did nothing to dampen the excitement. Lanterns strung across the town square cast a warm golden light on the faces of those gathered. The festival had grown to include music, storytelling, and food stalls, offering everything from cinnamon-spiced cider to roasted chestnuts. Ben Rivera stood by the stage, orchestrating a performance by local musicians, his grin visible from across the square. Captain Ross, though retired, moved through the crowd, exchanging greetings and sharing stories with old friends. Alex and Mia walked hand in hand through the square, pausing at the new mural that depicted scenes from the past year's journey. Children played nearby, their laughter a melody that blended with the soft strum of guitars. Clara approached the stage, her voice amplified by the microphone. Tonight, we celebrate not just the light around us, but the light within us. We remember that hope is a choice, one we make every day. Applause followed, and Alex felt Mia squeeze his hand. The festival was a symbol of their shared journey, a beacon that would guide them through whatever came next. As spring thawed the frost and brought new life to the town, Willow Creek's influence continued to grow. The Willow Creek Outreach Program received funding from the state, allowing them to hire a small team to support the expanding initiative. New hires included young people inspired by Clara and Eliza's stories, eager minds ready to contribute to the movement that had given their town hope. Mia took on a leadership role in organizing workshops on community engagement and conflict resolution, her natural warmth drawing people in. One day, after a particularly lively session at the community center, she found Alex waiting for her at the door, a proud smile on his face. "Mrs. Turner, leading the next wave of leaders," Alex teased, kissing her cheek. "Just following in your footsteps," she joked back, her eyes twinkling. They walked home through the warm spring evening, past gardens bursting with tulips and daffodils. The future felt like an open book, each chapter yet to be written. Years passed, and the lessons of Willow Creek were shared far and wide. Towns across the state implemented their own versions of the community board and the mentorship programs that had transformed Willow Creek. The town itself continued to thrive, each new season a testament to its journey. Alex, now seasoned as chief of police, found himself mentoring a new generation of officers. Ben, who had risen to captain, often joined him in training sessions, their camaraderie as strong as ever. Clara's work on the outreach program became nationally recognized, her speeches drawing crowds who were eager to hear how hope could turn the tide of fear. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of pinks and golds, Alex stood on the hill overlooking the town. The lights of the square twinkled below, and the laughter of families drifted up on the breeze. Mia joined him, slipping her arm through his as they gazed out over Willow Creek. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she whispered. "It is," Alex agreed, the word holding the weight of their shared memories. "And it's just the beginning." Mia looked up at him, her eyes filled with the confidence that had always grounded him. "What comes next, Chief?" Alex smiled, eyes on the horizon where the sky met the rolling hills. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together, just like we always have." And as they stood there, the town behind them alive with light and life, Alex knew that Willow Creek's story would continue in the moments yet to come, carried by the people who dared to believe in something better, and by the generations who would follow, learning from their example. The future was unwritten, but in the heart of Willow Creek, hope would always be a choice they made. Willow Creek's journey was now part of its identity, woven into stories told around campfires, in classrooms, and at town gatherings. The town's resilience had not only set a benchmark for its people, but inspired surrounding communities to strive for similar change. The younger generation grew up hearing tales of their parents' courage and the community's unwavering spirit, filling them with pride and a sense of responsibility. Alex Turner watched this shift from his office, where photographs lined the wall, moments captured from the past decade, showing the growth of the town and the people within it. One picture, taken on the night of the first Festival of Lights, showed Clara, Eliza, and Alex standing shoulder to shoulder, smiles wide and eyes bright with hope. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Ben Rivera walked in, now a confident and respected captain. "Chief, we've got some visitors from Maple Ridge. They're here to discuss starting their own community program and want to hear directly from you." Alex grinned, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "Let's go show them how it's done." They met in the community room at the library, where representatives from Maple Ridge sat with notebooks and hopeful expressions. Clara led the meeting, her voice a mix of encouragement and practical advice, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement. Alex spoke about the importance of truth, the lessons learned from moments of failure, and the community's power to reclaim its narrative. As he looked around, he saw young faces in the crowd, teenagers who had grown up under the light of Willow Creek's transformation. They were ready to take the baton and continue the work their parents and mentors had started. One bright spring afternoon, Eliza Monroe gathered the children of the town in the garden behind the library. She told them stories of George, not just the man remembered in solemn moments, but the one who laughed easily and worked with joy. The children listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder as she recounted the tales that defined their heritage. Mia joined Eliza, bringing with her a box of small handmade lanterns. Each child was given one as Eliza explained their significance. "These lanterns represent the light that George believed was in each of us. It's a light that helps others find their way." The children beamed, proudly holding their lanterns as the sun dipped below the horizon. The glow of the small lights mirrored the larger lanterns that now hung year-round in the town square, a permanent reminder of what had been overcome. Alex watched from a distance, his heart full as he saw the traditions being passed on. The sight reminded him that while the fight for truth and justice was never easy, it was always worth it. News of Willow Creek's story continued to spread, drawing attention from beyond the state. One evening, Clara received an invitation to speak at a national summit on community-led reform. She approached Alex with the news, excitement tinged with nerves. "They want to hear about Willow Creek's transformation firsthand, from the people who lived it," Clara said, eyes bright with anticipation. Alex leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're the perfect person to tell it, Clara. No one knows better what it took to get here." Clara nodded, but then her gaze softened. "I want you to come, Alex. We started this journey together, and I think it's important we share it that way." A week later, they stood in front of an audience filled with community leaders, activists, and policymakers. Clara began with the story of George Monroe, the man whose quiet strength had inspired an entire town. Alex spoke of the trials, the moments when hope seemed lost, and the decisions that changed everything. The audience was captivated, some moved to tears. When they finished, the room erupted in applause. People approached them with questions, eager to learn how to apply Willow Creek's model to their own communities. A woman from a town called Cedar Grove approached Alex, her eyes filled with hope. "Do you really think a place like ours could change, like Willow Creek did?" Alex met her gaze, his voice steady and sure. "I know it can. It starts with one choice and one person brave enough to make it. The rest follows." Back in Willow Creek, Alex continued to guide the town, now with new faces stepping into roles of leadership. Young adults who had grown up watching the town's transformation were now eager to contribute. One of these was Liam, a teenager who had spent countless afternoons at the library listening to Eliza's stories. Liam approached Alex one day with a proposal for a youth council, a way for younger residents to have a voice in community decisions. Alex listened, impressed by the young man's passion. "It's a great idea, Liam," Alex said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's make it happen." The council met for the first time in the community center, filled with the sound of youthful energy and ideas. They discussed projects, from adding more public art to organizing mentorships for high school students. Alex watched from the back, Mia at his side, pride swelling as he realized that the future of Willow Creek was already in capable hands. The years continued their steady march, but Willow Creek's spirit remained unwavering. The town had grown beyond its own boundaries, its story now part of workshops, documentaries, and lectures around the country. Alex found himself balancing his duties with new requests for advice and visits, but he never let them pull him too far from home. One evening, as he walked through the town square illuminated by the glow of the ever-present lanterns, he noticed Eliza sitting on a bench, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He joined her, the night air cool and quiet. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Eliza said, gazing at the lights. "I like to think George can see this, see what his story has done." Alex nodded, his voice soft. "He would be proud, Eliza. And so should you." They sat in companionable silence, the sounds of laughter and music drifting from the café. The town's past, once so heavy, now lay peacefully behind them, while the future stretched out in front, filled with possibilities. As the stars glittered above and the lanterns swayed gently, Alex felt the weight of all that had been achieved and all that was yet to come. Willow Creek had become more than a place. It was an emblem of perseverance, a testament to what could happen when people chose to fight for light over darkness. And as long as the lanterns glowed, that light would never fade. The years continued to weave their intricate patterns through Willow Creek, each one adding new threads to the town's story. The lessons of courage, unity, and the power of truth had become as familiar to the townspeople as the sound of the church bells that rang each Sunday morning. Alex Turner stood on the steps of the library, now bustling with life as visitors came from all over to see the place that had become synonymous with community-led transformation. Inside, Clara Evans led a workshop on ethical leadership, her voice confident and filled with purpose. The room was packed with young adults and community leaders, their notepads filled with ideas and their faces eager for change. Watching from the doorway, Alex marveled at how far they had come. Clara had grown from a hesitant voice to a beacon of guidance, admired not just in Willow Creek, but far beyond. The once timid nurse was now sought after for her insight and her story, which had inspired reforms and inspired others to speak out. "Chief," a voice called, snapping Alex out of his thoughts. It was Ben, who now wore the title of Deputy Chief, a position that suited his unyielding loyalty and sharp instincts. "There's someone here to see you. Says she came all the way from Cedar Grove." Alex nodded, following Ben to the main hall where a young woman waited, her hands clasped nervously. She was introduced as Sophia, a teacher from Cedar Grove. "Chief Turner," she said, eyes wide with determination, "we've started a community group inspired by Willow Creek's story. I wanted to meet you and hear how you kept going, even when it seemed impossible." Alex smiled warmly. "The secret is, we never did it alone. Come on, let's talk." As they sat down, Alex shared stories of those crucial moments, the decisions that had changed everything, and the people who had made it possible. Sophia's questions were sharp, her enthusiasm infectious, and Alex felt the old excitement stir in him. The legacy of Willow Creek was reaching farther than he had ever dreamed. Winter returned, blanketing the town in a familiar white coat, and Willow Creek once again prepared for its annual Festival of Lights. This year, the festival carried an added layer of importance. It was the 10th anniversary of the year George Monroe's story first changed everything. The town buzzed with preparations, each household stringing up lanterns and garlands that turned the square into a sea of light. Eliza Monroe stood in her garden, wrapping a string of lights around the old oak tree that George had planted decades ago. She paused, fingers resting on the rough bark, and felt a warmth spread through her. It wasn't just about the memories anymore. It was about the impact those memories had created. Mia arrived with a basket of homemade decorations and waved at Eliza, her breath puffing in the cold air. "Need an extra pair of hands?" Eliza smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling. "Always." They worked together in comfortable silence, the sky turning a deep shade of twilight. As they finished, Mia looked up at the tree, now twinkling with lights that seemed to touch the stars. "It's beautiful, Eliza." "Thank you," Eliza whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek, though she was smiling. "George would have loved this." The night of the festival, Alex took the stage, the crowd filled with familiar faces and new ones. People who had come to see how hope could be built from hardship stood shoulder to shoulder with the townsfolk. 10 years ago, we faced our darkest moments, Alex began, his voice carrying over the crowd. But today, we don't just remember what we overcame, we celebrate what we built from it. Applause rang out, and lanterns were released, their golden light floating up into the dark, 100 small suns that spoke of resilience and unity. The influence of Willow Creek's transformation had grown into a network of communities across the state. The Willow Creek Outreach Program became a nonprofit organization with Clara at the helm, supported by a dedicated team. They hosted annual summits that brought together leaders from different towns, fostering a collaborative spirit that pushed for continual reform. One day, Alex received an invitation to a roundtable discussion in the state capitol. He was asked to speak on the principles of ethical leadership in community safety. The event drew an audience of officials, policymakers, and community advocates. As he took the stage, the weight of his journey pressed on him, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what had been achieved. True leadership, he said, meeting the eyes of the crowd, is about serving with integrity, knowing that the choices we make ripple out to touch countless lives. The room was silent, listening intently. Alex finished, and as applause rose, he realized that Willow Creek's legacy had become something much larger, influencing not just towns, but policies and state initiatives aimed at fostering ethical governance and transparency. Back in Willow Creek, Mia and Ben, who had been holding down the fort, updated him on a new project, a mentorship program at the police station that paired officers with young people interested in community service and public safety. It was Ben's brainchild, inspired by his own journey under Alex's guidance. "We're planting seeds, Chief," Ben said with a grin. "The next generation is ready." The youth council Liam had started blossomed into a dynamic group, one that worked with town leaders to propose projects and voice concerns. They organized events, from food drives to educational workshops, that brought more young people into community affairs. Liam, now in his 20s and a college graduate, returned to Willow Creek with plans to run for a seat on the town council. On the night of his campaign launch, Alex stood at the back of the room, a quiet observer. Clara sat beside him, watching with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. "Look at him," Clara said, her voice soft. "He was just a boy when this all started. Now he's leading." Alex nodded, eyes never leaving Liam as he spoke passionately about the future. "That's the point, isn't it? We started something they can carry on." The campaign event ended with applause and cheers, and as Liam stepped down from the podium, he caught Alex's eye and gave a nod that spoke of gratitude and respect. The torch was passing, and Willow Creek's legacy was secure. The day Liam won his seat on the town council, the town gathered in the square, the same place where it all began. Alex, Mia, Clara, Eliza, and Ben stood together, watching as the young man took an oath to serve his community with honesty and care. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter and music. The café served warm cider, and the community garden, now filled with flowers and vegetables, was illuminated by strings of lights. Eliza watched the crowd, her heart full as she turned to Alex. "You know, I used to wonder if George's memory would fade, if people would forget." "They never will," Alex said, his voice steady. "Because what started with George turned into something bigger. It became part of who we are." As the sky darkened, lanterns were lit, their glow soft and reassuring. The town looked on as Liam and his friends led a procession, carrying their own lanterns through the streets, symbolizing the passing of hope from one generation to the next. Alex took Mia's hand and held it tightly. They stood surrounded by the warmth of their town, the echoes of the past now part of the heartbeat that drove Willow Creek forward. The light of the lanterns cast long, golden shadows, a reminder that while darkness would come, the choice to shine remained. Willow Creek's story, filled with trials and triumphs, would continue long after Alex, Clara, Eliza, and Ben were memories themselves, and as long as there were people who believed in the power of truth, courage, and community, the lanterns would keep glowing, guiding future generations along the path they had forged. And so, under the starlit sky, surrounded by friends and the laughter of children, Alex Turner knew that Willow Creek's legacy would endure. as eternal as the light that had brought them together. Years passed like the pages of a well-loved book, each season adding to the intricate story of Willow Creek. The town had grown, not in size but in reputation, drawing visitors and aspiring leaders eager to learn from its story. The town square, with its iconic lanterns, had become a symbol recognized across the state, a beacon of hope and resilience. One morning, Alex Turner sat on his porch, watching the sun paint the sky with strokes of gold and pink. The first warm breezes of spring rustled the leaves, carrying with them the hum of new beginnings. The garden Mia had started years ago now sprawled lush and vibrant, filled with colorful blooms that welcomed the season's change. Mia came outside, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. She joined Alex, sitting beside him and leaning into his shoulder. "Feels like another chapter is about to start," she said, her voice soft and full of contentment. Alex took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through him. "It does, and I'm ready for it." The day ahead was significant. Clara and Eliza were hosting a gathering at the library to celebrate the anniversary of the Willow Creek Outreach Program. The event promised to bring stories from communities that had found their strength by following Willow Creek's example. The library's community room was abuzz with conversation. People of all ages filled the space, sharing stories of how the program had touched their lives. Representatives from towns that had once struggled now stood proudly, speaking of their own transformations. Clara took the podium, her eyes scanning the room filled with familiar faces and new ones. "What started as one story became many," she said, her voice resonant with emotion. "George Monroe's legacy isn't just here in this library or in the square. It's in every town that has chosen to face its challenges with courage." Eliza stepped up next, holding a folder of letters sent from towns across the state. "We received stories from places far and near, all telling us one thing: when people stand together, change is possible." She opened the folder and began to read excerpts aloud, each one filled with gratitude and hope. As the room listened, Alex felt a swell of pride and a sense of completeness. He exchanged a glance with Mia, who nodded, her eyes glistening. This was the ripple effect they had dreamed of, a legacy of hope reaching far beyond the borders of Willow Creek. Liam, now an established town council member, approached Alex after the event with an idea. "Chief Turner," he began, though he rarely called Alex by his formal title anymore, "I think we should take this program national. We've proven it works, and there are towns out there that could use this kind of support." Alex looked at Liam, seeing the same determination in the young man's eyes that he had once felt when standing at the edge of an uncertain future. "You're ambitious, Liam," he said with a smile. "But you're right. It's time." The announcement of a plan to expand the Willow Creek Outreach Program beyond the state brought excitement and challenges. Meetings were held with state officials and nonprofit leaders who wanted to contribute to the effort. Clara, with her deep experience, was named director of the national initiative, supported by a coalition of volunteers and mentors trained in Willow Creek. Alex transitioned into a new role as an advisor to the program, balancing his duties as chief of police with this new responsibility. The expansion took months of planning and long nights, but the spark of hope that had started in their small town now promised to illuminate a path for many more. The day of Clara's official appointment as the director of the national program was bittersweet. The town gathered in the square, adorned with lanterns and garlands, to bid farewell to one of its most beloved leaders. Alex stood on the stage with Clara, the sun setting behind them in a blaze of oranges and purples. "Clara," Alex said, turning to face her, "your voice gave this town hope when it was most needed. Now it's time for others to hear it." Clara's eyes shimmered with emotion as she took the microphone. "This isn't a goodbye," she said, looking out at the crowd that had become her family. "This is a promise that the light we've nurtured here will reach beyond us, carried by others who need it just as much as we once did." Applause thundered, and Clara looked to Eliza, who nodded with pride. The crowd's faces were illuminated by the soft glow of the lanterns, each one a testament to the enduring spirit of Willow Creek. As the evening deepened, music filled the air, and people danced in the square, their laughter mingling with the cool night breeze. Alex found himself surrounded by friends and neighbors, their conversations filled with memories and dreams for the future. Years continued to roll by, each one leaving its mark on Willow Creek. The town evolved, welcoming new families and saying goodbye to familiar faces. The national outreach program, now called the Monroe Initiative, flourished under Clara's leadership, touching communities far and wide. Eliza Monroe, now older but still vibrant, often visited the garden where George's tree stood, now towering and full of life. The oak tree had become a place for reflection, and young children played beneath its branches, unaware of the history it symbolized, but drawn to its protective shade. One evening, Alex and Mia sat in their favorite spot overlooking the town square. The sky was a deep navy, and stars twinkled like lanterns in the vast expanse. The square below was alive with lights, laughter, and the hum of a town that had found its way. "Can you believe it's been so many years?" Mia asked, leaning her head on Alex's shoulder. "It feels like yesterday," Alex said, his voice low and full of reverence. "But it's also an eternity. So much has changed, and yet the heart of Willow Creek is still the same." Mia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the light from the lanterns. "That's because it was never about just one moment or one person. It was about all of us, and what we chose to do when it mattered." As they sat in silence, the sound of a new generation playing in the square rose into the night, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Alex felt a deep peace settle in him, knowing that the light they had fought for would continue to guide the town long after they were gone. The lanterns swayed gently, their glow unwavering, and in that moment, under the stars and surrounded by the echoes of love and resilience, Alex Turner knew that Willow Creek's story would live on, brighter and more enduring than ever. The legacy of the town was not just a chapter in a book. It was an ongoing story, a lantern that would pass from hand to hand, heart to heart, lighting the way for generations to come. The legacy of Willow Creek, cemented by years of resilience and the power of community, continued to grow beyond what any of its original guardians had imagined. The Monroe Initiative, under Clara's steady leadership, had established chapters in towns across the nation. Each community that adopted the model shared stories of their own transformations, stories of courage sparked by the quiet determination that had once defined Willow Creek. Alex Turner traveled less frequently now, content to see others take the reins. Still, whenever a new chapter launched, a report reached him, each one rekindling that familiar pride. One afternoon, while sitting at his desk at the police station, a letter arrived, postmarked from Cedar Grove. The letter was written by Sophia, the young teacher he'd met years before. It detailed the progress of her community, how they'd implemented initiatives inspired by Willow Creek, and how hope had taken root where despair once lingered. At the bottom of the page, she'd added a note. "Your lanterns lit our path. Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to choose hope." Alex set the letter down and leaned back, the warm light of the afternoon sun spilling across his desk. The echoes of George Monroe's legacy had reached farther than they could have ever dreamed. Each lantern passed on, lighting the way for those who followed. The garden behind the library had become a cherished place for the people of Willow Creek. It was where new generations learned about the town's history, where families gathered for quiet moments, and where Eliza Monroe often found herself surrounded by laughter and whispers of the past. One warm spring day, Alex and Mia joined Eliza under George's oak tree, its branches now wide and strong, providing cool shade. They sat on a blanket, watching as children darted between the flower beds, their joy unhindered. Eliza smiled, her eyes following a little boy who waved at her before running to join his friends. "George would have loved this," she said, her voice soft but sure. "He believed in the goodness of people and the power of shared stories." Mia reached over, placing a hand on Eliza's. "And because of that, we're all here, still sharing his story." As the afternoon sun shifted, casting long shadows across the garden, Alex felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The garden, much like the town, was an embodiment of all they had worked for, a reminder that life, though full of trials, always moved forward, seeded by the past but reaching toward the future. The Youth Council, founded by Liam and supported by the town's older generation, continued to thrive. It had grown into a platform where young voices were not just heard but sought after. Under Liam's mentorship, a new group of leaders emerged, ready to shape Willow Creek's future with fresh perspectives and ideas. One evening, Liam invited Alex to a council meeting where they discussed upcoming projects, including an initiative to modernize community facilities while preserving the town's historic charm. Alex sat quietly at the back, listening as teenagers debated passionately, their faces alight with the same hope that had once fueled him and his friends. After the meeting, Liam approached Alex with a grin. "They're good, aren't they?" he said, gesturing to the group dispersing into the night. Alex nodded, pride warming his chest. "They're better than we were at their age. And that's the point." Liam laughed, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. "You know, none of this would have been possible without you and the others showing us that change isn't just for the history books." Alex placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, squeezing it firmly. "Keep pushing forward, Liam. That's all we need to do." With another winter came the annual Festival of Lights, a tradition that now included visits from people all over who came to see the lanterns and hear the stories of Willow Creek's transformation. This year, Eliza Monroe was asked to tell George's story once more, a request that filled her with both joy and bittersweet memories. Standing under the canopy of lanterns, Eliza spoke in a voice that had become steadier over the years. George was a man who believed that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward. When we faced our darkest days, it was his belief that carried us through. The crowd, gathered in coats and scarves, listened with rapt attention. The wind carried the soft flicker of flames, each lantern swaying gently as if nodding in agreement. Mia stood beside Alex, their hands entwined, and he felt the weight of those early days. The fear, the uncertainty, the determination. All of it led to this, a moment when the town stood together, not just remembering but celebrating. When the final lantern was released, rising into the crisp night sky, Alex whispered, "Thank you, George." It floated higher, its light mingling with the stars, and for a moment it was as if George's spirit looked down on them, proud and at peace. The years that followed were marked by continued growth and unwavering commitment to the ideals that had shaped Willow Creek. Liam took on larger projects, overseeing initiatives that brought art, education, and opportunity to every corner of the town. Clara's work with the Monroe Initiative expanded to other states, fostering a network of towns that shared resources, stories, and hope. Alex watched these changes with the satisfaction of a man who knew his work was complete, yet his spirit remained invested. One evening, while sitting on the porch with Mia, now surrounded by the laughter of grandchildren playing in the garden, he reflected on how life had come full circle. "It's strange, isn't it?" Mia said, her eyes on the children. "We started out hoping for a way through the dark, and now look at this, our light spreading farther than we could have imagined." Alex smiled, leaning forward to watch the lanterns that still adorned the town square. Their glow was constant, a promise that what had been built would endure. "Hope was never just for us," he said. "It was always meant to be shared." As the sun set and the stars began to fill the sky, the glow of the lanterns seemed to stretch into the horizon, illuminating not just the town, but the hearts of everyone who had chosen to believe in something better. The story of Willow Creek, carried by the wind, by laughter, and by the light that had become its eternal symbol, would live on. And as Alex sat, surrounded by love, the echoes of their journey settled around him like a soft, familiar embrace. The legacy of Willow Creek was no longer just a chapter in history, but an ever-growing story, one that would continue as long as there were people willing to pass the light from one heart to another. Willow Creek continued to thrive, its influence touching even the most remote communities that heard its story. The annual Festival of Lights became a state tradition, inspiring towns near and far to create their own versions, celebrating unity, resilience, and the power of shared hope. Alex Turner, now retired but ever present, watched as new leaders stepped forward to keep the town's spirit alive. One such leader was Emma, a bright and determined young woman who had grown up under the lanterns of the square, listening to stories of courage from Eliza and learning leadership from Liam. Emma organized a town-wide event to connect Willow Creek's older generation with the youth, calling it Bridging Generations. The event was a day-long gathering filled with storytelling, workshops, and shared meals. Under the sprawling branches of George's oak tree, older residents recounted moments from the town's transformation, their voices weaving tales of bravery and lessons learned. Mia joined Alex under the tree, listening as a young boy read a story he had written about the town's legacy. "He reminds me of you," Mia whispered, her eyes dancing with memories. Alex chuckled softly. "Maybe he'll write the next chapter of this story." As the day ended and the stars emerged, Emma stood on the small stage set up in the square. "We are all part of this legacy," she said, her voice carrying on the night breeze. "The light we share today is the light that will guide us tomorrow." The crowd erupted in applause, and Alex felt a familiar warmth spread through him. The story of Willow Creek was in capable hands, ready to be carried forward. The following year, the Monroe Initiative celebrated its 15th anniversary. Clara, now a figure of national influence, returned to Willow Creek for a special ceremony honoring George Monroe's memory and the incredible impact of his legacy. The town square was packed with people from across the state, each holding a lantern as they stood shoulder to shoulder. The sight was breathtaking, a sea of golden lights illuminating faces filled with gratitude and hope. Clara took the stage, her eyes reflecting the glow around her. "George Monroe taught us that hope is not passive. It is something we choose, something we fight for. Because of him and because of all of you, that hope now shines far beyond Willow Creek." Eliza stepped up, her voice unwavering despite the emotion in her eyes. "George's story is our story, and as long as we continue to share it, to live by the values it taught us, we will never lose sight of who we are." The crowd stood in silence as lanterns were raised, their collective glow blending with the stars above. Alex stood among the crowd, surrounded by Mia, Ben, and the new generation of leaders. The moment felt timeless, a testament to the strength of community and the choices that had built it. One summer afternoon, as Alex strolled through the bustling market, he noticed a familiar face, Sophia from Cedar Grove. Now older, but with the same spark in her eyes. She was accompanied by a group of young leaders who had come to Willow Creek to learn firsthand from the source of their inspiration. "Chief Turner!" Sophia called out, waving him over. The group of young people watched him with wide-eyed admiration, eager to hear from the man who had played such a pivotal role in Willow Creek's transformation. "It's good to see you, Sophia," Alex said, shaking her hand. His gaze swept over the group. "And it looks like you brought the future with you." Sophia nodded, pride clear in her smile. "They're here to learn, to see that change isn't just something you read about. It's something you build." Alex shared stories of the early days, the fear, the risk, and the hope that had carried them through. The young leaders listened intently, asking questions about the challenges and the victories. By the time the sun began to set, they stood in the square as the lanterns flickered to life. Sophia looked around, her expression softening. "It's beautiful how one town's story can inspire so many others." "It's not just our story anymore," Alex said, eyes on the lanterns. "It's theirs too." The continued expansion of the Monroe Initiative brought more changes to Willow Creek. The town opened a community learning center, a place where people from around the country came to learn about sustainable community building, ethical leadership, and the power of collective action. Emma, now a leader in her own right, helped organize workshops that included storytelling sessions led by Eliza and tactical training from Ben and Alex. The center's walls were adorned with murals depicting scenes of the town's journey, moments of darkness illuminated by acts of courage. One afternoon, Liam joined Alex at the center, pointing to a mural that showed George carving wood, surrounded by symbols of hope. "We should think about bringing in more voices from outside to show how Willow Creek's lessons have been adapted elsewhere," Liam suggested. Alex's face lit up with agreement. That's a great idea. It'll remind everyone that this isn't just about looking inward. It's about reaching out. The first event to include outside voices was planned for the next year's Festival of Lights, promising an even larger celebration that would blend stories from Willow Creek and beyond. The evening of the expanded Festival of Lights was unlike any before it. Representatives from towns and cities that had followed in Willow Creek's footsteps gathered, each carrying their own lanterns that symbolized their shared journey. The square was a kaleidoscope of faces, colors, and voices, each one a testament to the enduring power of community. Alex stood at the edge of the square with Mia, their grandchildren playing nearby. He watched as Emma took the stage, her voice strong as she introduced speakers from Cedar Grove, Hollow Point, and other places touched by the Monroe Initiative. "When we light these lanterns," Emma said, raising hers high, "we do so knowing that this light is shared by thousands, each one a story, a moment, a choice to keep hope alive." The square glowed as lanterns were lifted, their light mingling and spreading like fireflies across the sky. Alex felt a lump in his throat as he watched, the scene blurring with memories of the past. The laughter of children, the warmth of friends, and the love of his family enveloped him. As the lanterns soared higher, their glow mingling with the stars, Alex whispered a silent promise to continue nurturing the legacy they had built and to trust that it would be carried on by those who followed. Mia leaned into him, her voice filled with pride. "Look at what we've done, Alex." He took a deep breath, the cool night air filled with the scent of possibility. "It's more than what we've done," he said. "It's what they'll do next." The lanterns, bright and unwavering, drifted into the night, a living testament to the power of a story that began in a small town and grew into a light that would never be extinguished. The legacy of Willow Creek would continue, carried by every hand that lifted a lantern and every heart that chose to believe in hope. The stories of Willow Creek's transformation had reached far and wide, drawing attention not just from nearby towns, but from leaders across the nation who sought to understand the heart of this small community's enduring light. Invitations arrived from universities, policy think tanks, and international organizations, eager to hear how the lessons of resilience and unity could be applied to their own challenges. Alex Turner received a letter one afternoon that surprised him. It was an invitation to speak at an international conference on community resilience in Geneva. He sat at the kitchen table, reading the letter over and over, a mix of pride and disbelief coursing through him. Mia walked in, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, setting down a basket of fresh herbs from the garden. Alex looked up, the corners of his mouth lifting into a smile. "They want me to speak in Geneva, about Willow Creek, about everything we've done." Mia's eyes widened, and then she laughed, a sound full of joy and surprise. "Alex, that's incredible. Just think of it. Your words, George's legacy, reaching across the world." He nodded slowly, the magnitude of the invitation settling over him. It wasn't just his story, it was the story of the town, of George, of Clara, of Eliza, and of every person who had ever chosen to believe that change was possible. The trip to Geneva was more than Alex had ever anticipated. He arrived to find a city vibrant with culture and ideas, filled with people eager to share solutions to the world's problems. As he stepped into the grand hall where he would speak, the weight of the journey that had brought him there felt immense. Clara joined him, flying in from one of her many engagements with the Monroe Initiative. "Can you believe it?" she whispered as they took their seats. "From Willow Creek to this." Alex shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. "It's more than I ever imagined." When it was his turn to speak, Alex stepped up to the podium, looking out at a sea of faces representing different cultures, backgrounds, and experiences. He began with George Monroe's story, how one man's integrity had sparked a chain reaction that changed everything. He spoke of the trials they faced, the moments that tested their resolve, and the unwavering belief that hope was worth the fight. "We learned that true change comes when people refuse to let fear silence them," Alex said, his voice steady. It comes when a community decides to stand together and chooses to be brave, even in the face of uncertainty. The audience was quiet as he finished, the words settling into the room like a shared breath. Then, applause erupted, echoing through the hall. As Alex stepped back, Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes misty with pride. "They needed to hear that," she said, "and now they know it's possible." Returning to Willow Creek after Geneva felt like coming home after a long journey. The town welcomed Alex back with open arms, their pride evident in the warm greetings and stories exchanged at the cafe and market. He shared tales of the conference and the people he had met, inspiring new ideas for how Willow Creek could continue to grow and support others. Ben Rivera, now a seasoned deputy with years of leadership behind him, approached Alex one evening at a community gathering. "You know, Chief," Ben said, the old nickname lingering out of habit, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we start training leaders here who can help take these lessons abroad." Alex considered it, the idea sparking excitement. "We could create a mentorship program, bring people in to learn directly from us." "Exactly," Ben said. "If we can inspire one town, we can inspire 100 more." Plans were soon set in motion for a leadership exchange program that would bring leaders from other communities to Willow Creek for immersive experiences. Clara, Eliza, and even Liam were involved, sharing their expertise and stories with those who arrived eager to learn. The first cohort of the Leadership Exchange program brought leaders from towns and cities both near and far. One participant, a mayor from a small town in Mexico named Camilla, stood out for her passion and stories that echoed Willow Creek's own journey. She spoke of her town's struggles with corruption and how hope had started to grow among the people, inspired by stories of Willow Creek's resilience. During an evening gathering in the square, Camilla shared her story with the townsfolk. "We faced darkness too," she said, her voice strong, "but then we heard about a town that chose light. And now we have come here, not just to learn, but to share that your light has sparked hope far beyond these streets." Alex watched as the town listened, captivated, realizing that Willow Creek's story had become more than a chapter. It was part of a larger narrative, carried on by new voices and new dreams. Mia leaned against him, her eyes glistening. "Look at what it's become, Alex. It's so much bigger than just us now." He nodded, the truth of her words settling deep in his chest. "And it's only going to keep growing." As the years passed, Willow Creek's legacy solidified into an enduring movement. The Leadership Exchange program became a cornerstone, drawing people from around the world who returned to their own communities with renewed faith and practical strategies for change. The town continued to thrive, its streets alive with the laughter of children and the steady hum of new projects and ideas. Alex, now an elder statesman in the town, spent his days mentoring, writing, and occasionally speaking at events organized by the Monroe Initiative. Eliza continued to be a figure of inspiration, visiting schools to tell George's story, while Mia remained a cherished presence, organizing garden festivals and helping newcomers find their place. One evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek and the lanterns in the square began to glow, Alex and Mia sat side by side on their porch. The sound of distant music drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of blooming flowers and the cool night breeze. "Do you ever wonder if George knew?" Mia asked, her voice soft. Alex looked at the lanterns, their light unwavering. "I think he did in his own way. He knew that hope, once kindled, can never truly be extinguished." They sat in silence, watching as the lanterns swayed gently, their light stretching out into the twilight, connecting one story to another, one town to the next. The legacy of Willow Creek was more than a memory. It was a living, breathing testament to what could be achieved when people stood together, chose courage over fear, and believed in the power of hope. It was a flame that would continue to pass from hand to hand, generation to generation, ensuring that even in the darkest times, the light would always remain. As the years rolled on, the reach of the Monroe Initiative stretched across continents. What began as a small-town story had transformed into an international movement. Willow Creek became a destination for conferences, drawing leaders from around the world who wanted to experience firsthand what resilience looked like, not just in theory, but in practice. Emma, now a formidable leader in her own right, took charge of these events, organizing discussions and workshops that blended tradition with innovation. One summer, a delegation from Africa arrived, sharing their own tales of struggle and triumph. Their stories spoke of adversity, but also of community-led solutions that had changed lives. The square echoed with languages from different continents, all woven together by the shared thread of hope. Alex Turner, though retired from his official duties, attended each conference, offering wisdom and stories. He watched with quiet pride as people shared ideas and learned from one another, each speaker drawing on the enduring legacy of Willow Creek. One evening, a leader named Adebayo, who had traveled from Nigeria, spoke to Alex at a reception. "Chief Turner," he said, using the old title with a smile, "in my town, we tell stories around the fire at night. I've started telling our children about a place far away, where people chose hope when it was hardest. We tell them about Willow Creek." Alex's chest tightened, his eyes misting. "Thank you, Adebayo. That means more than I can say." The generations that had grown up under the soft glow of the lanterns were now adults, carrying forward the spirit of their forebears. Liam, who had once been a boy on the youth council, was now the town's mayor. His leadership was marked by empathy, innovation, and a deep reverence for the lessons taught by Alex, Clara, Eliza, and others. Emma spearheaded new projects that integrated art, education, and social responsibility, ensuring that the town's past was never forgotten. Under her guidance, the Community Learning Center expanded to include an archive of stories, interviews, writings, and photographs that documented Willow Creek's journey. On one occasion, Liam called a special gathering at the Learning Center. The room filled with faces both familiar and new, and Alex sat in the front row, surrounded by Mia, Ben, and Clara. Liam addressed the crowd, his voice clear and passionate. "We are here not just to honor those who paved the way, but to remember that their work is not done. We continue it every day with every choice we make." Applause erupted, and as Alex looked around, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The torch had been passed, and the future was in capable hands. One day, Alex found himself alone in the garden behind the library, where George's oak tree cast its dappled shade over the benches and flower beds. The tree had become a living monument, a place where people came to think, remember, and find solace. Eliza joined him, settling onto the bench beside him. They sat in silence for a time, watching the children play in the distance. Eliza broke the quiet, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about the beginning, Alex? How uncertain it all felt." "All the time," he replied, smiling faintly. "But those moments, as hard as they were, led us here." Eliza nodded, her gaze drifting to the leaves above. "George would have loved to see this, to see what his simple belief in people has created." Alex reached over, placing his hand over hers. "He does, Eliza. He's here in every story told, every light that's lit." They sat there as the day faded into twilight, the warmth of their shared memories a quiet testament to the passage of time. The 20th Festival of Lights marked a significant milestone for Willow Creek. Invitations were sent to leaders and friends from all the places that had drawn inspiration from the town. The square was adorned with more lanterns than ever before, their soft glow reflecting the faces of people from across the world. Alex, now in his 80s, walked slowly through the square, Mia's hand in his. They were surrounded by friends, their children, and grandchildren who had come to celebrate the legacy they'd helped build. Speeches were made, and stories were shared, each one an echo of the original spark that George Monroe had ignited. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he stood with a cane, but carried himself with the same quiet strength he'd always possessed. "Tonight," he began, his voice carrying despite its age, "we celebrate not just a festival, but a choice that has been made over and over again, to believe in each other, to hold fast to hope, and to share our light." As the crowd raised their lanterns, their glow joined with the stars, casting the town in a light that seemed to reach beyond time. The years moved forward, and with them, so did the people of Willow Creek. The town, once marked by struggle, was now known worldwide as a symbol of transformation. The Monroe Initiative continued to grow, led by Emma and other young visionaries who had been mentored under the tree where George once worked. Alex Turner's health began to decline with age, but he remained a presence in the town. His wisdom sought by those who valued the stories and lessons he carried. One summer evening, surrounded by family and friends in the square, he watched as the lanterns were lit once again. The light reached into the dusk, a living reminder of all they had built together. Mia sat beside him, their hands entwined. "Look at them," she said, nodding to the new generation leading the festivities, their voices clear and full of hope. Alex's eyes softened, and he whispered, "They're ready, Mia." "They've always been ready." When Alex passed quietly in his sleep later that year, the town mourned, but also celebrated the man who had guided them through their hardest times. A plaque was placed under George's oak tree, engraved with words that encapsulated the spirit of Willow Creek. "In hope, we find each other. In each other, we find strength." The lanterns in the square were lit once more, their light unwavering as people gathered to share stories, laugh, and remember. Willow Creek's story did not end there. It lived on in the voices of those who shared it, in the hands that passed the light, and in the hearts of people far and wide who believed that hope, once kindled, would never be extinguished.